Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Montpelier City Council. So first item is to review and approve the agenda, and we have had a lot of comments on the sprinkler ordinance. That's our last substantive item tonight. We have a very long and full agenda, and I'm going to suggest that we put that off to our next meeting. There are some members of the Planning Commission who wanted to comment on it who aren't going to be able to be here. I think there's some question about when we're going to get to it, and so
I would really ask that we not put it off, and the reason for that, we will have a second reading and we'll have ability for folks to talk about, but we're talking about things that are going to affect the building season this year, and we have folks currently who have requested variances that the variance committee is unable to give out under the current ordinance, and so it is urgent for people's projects this year. I'm happy to move it up, but I think it is really important that we at least have the first reading tonight, even if it means that we have a more substantial discussion at the next meeting.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I would agree with that.
Okay. All right. So we do have a whole host of budget things that we need to get through first. At least I would argue we need to do those first, and then we have let's see, 3 items: the farmers market, dog ordinance, and sprinkler ordinance. So we could just reverse those if folks want to do that and put the sprinkler ordinance as item number 14. Does that work? Okay, so that's what we'll do, and we'll get to it when we get to it.
Also just need to add onto the liquor license thing, we got renewal from Belladonna across the street. So.
Any other changes to the agenda?
Are we supposed to move up the...
Thank you.
There's an addendum.
Thank you, and I don't have... Let's see if I can call that up.
Proclamation. Part of
Wasn't it? And then we're going to pull it. So I think we should pull that from the consent agenda. Oh, I thought it's not on the consent agenda. I thought it was just a...
It was an add-on.
So, I'm sorry, let's see. Just trying to find it here.
It came from Jamie today.
Yeah.
Everybody beats me to it? Okay, here we go. Okay, so this item that has been proposed is the proclamation designating February 11th, 2018 as Amanda Pelkey Day in Montpelier. Amanda is a local Montpelier hockey star. She's going to be competing in the Olympics, and it's a resolution to honor her. So I'm not sure what was being suggested here.
It was just saying we added it to the agenda. No, I think we thought people would want to talk about it.
Okay, great.
And just suggested move it to the beginning so people will know.
Well, I can say I'm very proud of Amanda, and it was her fourth grade, or I think when she was 4 years old was her Little League coach. So that started then. So very exciting to see her success. Any other comments? Okay, and I think we're going to maybe do something else, as I understand it, outside another event that involves more people in the community. Okay, so we'll add that proclamation as part of our consent agenda when we get to that. We do need to approve the agenda, though. With that change, without any objection, we'll consider the agenda approved. Next item is general business and appearances. This is an opportunity for anyone to comment on anything that's not on our agenda. Okay, so if we get something, yeah, Ben.
I'm Ben Eastwood. I live on 241 Main Street. So I'm concerned with the lack of transparency around the event at the high school the other day. As a parent of a student who was there at the high school, I first want to say a thank you to all the teachers and staff at the high school for doing an amazing job under a horrifying circumstance. But as a citizen, I'm concerned whenever there is a lack of transparency in an investigation, and I'm just curious as to what the mechanism for public oversight for the police department is in Montpelier. Because I looked on the website, and unlike many communities, there is no public oversight board. There is no mechanism for the public to have an input into how our police department polices in our city. There is no public record of what the requirements for the use of deadly force are. So I just want to sort of, I know this is a very tough subject for a lot of us, but I think that Mrs. Giffen deserves a full, transparent, honest accounting for what happened. And as a community, we deserve that as well. I just want to leave that there. I don't have a particular question.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thank you for your comments.
respond. Just briefly, Ben, and for anyone who's listening, the matter is under investigation by state police, not the city, and that's typical because, well, first of all, they were heavily involved in the incident. Second of all, when something does occur with one, you want a different agency looking at it. That's also reviewed by the elected Attorney General and the elected state's attorney. The City Council, through me, is the citizen oversight for the police department itself. I think any policies they have, whether it's about deadly force, would be certainly our public record. Be able to share those. In this case, any time we've received any information at all from the state police, we've immediately published it. I don't know any more necessarily than you do. We expect and are told we're going to have a full, complete accounting with video and other records and of the account when it's ready, and hopefully soon. We all want the same thing. And I agree with you that the family and the community and the officers involved all deserve to have the full story out.
And I'm not looking to armchair quarterback what happened there, but I'm also just concerned going forward as a community. This brings up this issue that we don't really have a public mechanism to discuss or to even really be aware of what the policies are that the police are operating under within our city. And that's the discussion that I would like to see started, is to, a lot of cities have a citizen review board that can oversee, that can suggest policies for the police, that can investigate if there's citizen complaints about alleged misconduct. And I think that the public is best served the more transparent our law enforcement is. Who is the old saying, who watches the watchers? And it was just, and when this happened, and I found out via text from my son who was in lockdown, and I have to say, again, thank you to the school for their quick release of information, and to you or John, or whoever, updated the city web page quickly. In this modern day of immediate social media communication, it is really good to, every minute that I didn't have information from the school was an eternity, and I think a lot of parents felt the same way. So, thank you.
Well, I had a child at that school too, so I know exactly how you feel.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, any other comments? All right, next item is the consent agenda. Do you have a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion, Justin.
I'd like to pull B and C, please.
B and C, what did you say? Okay. Okay, so we will come back to those. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we move to item 5, Green Mountain Transit Budget Proposal.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mayor, City Council members, thank you for having me here this evening. I know we tried one other night and it just went a little bit too long, so I appreciate you letting us get back in here and have a conversation. Couple things. My name is Mark Sousa. I'm the general manager of Green Mountain Transit, and have been for about a year, but have been with GMT for a little over 3 years. One of the couple things I want to kind of mention before we kind of get into some of maybe the recommendations and options that the city might want to think about. Currently, we are in the process of doing a next-gen comprehensive service analysis of our service. We've never done that in the years. We've always added service, but we've never quite been able to bring in a third party to kind of look at the 5 counties that we're in and kind of look at how they all work together. We're also doing a fare structure. All of that is on our webpage, and what they're doing is they're doing route profiles. And I will say that this route has come up as a possibility of having some changes made anyway, so that was kind of in the works. So that is all on our webpage called Next Gen, and that will kind of give you kind of the recommendation. They'll come in with a final recommendation to our board, and then we'll have to make some decisions on what those look like. It's everything from even down here where we currently have deviated routes, which means we go off track to go pick up people, to possibly having a complimentary paratransit service, which is 3/4 of a mile from the fixed route, which would also help with what we're talking about this evening. So that's just another caveat that's kind of in the works right now. So we came up with several options. The $40,000 that we're talking about here represents 20% of the $200,000 that this route currently costs. So we have a couple options that we could talk about, and I understand you have to make decisions tonight. So I was saying to Bill I could put it in a memo, but it appears tonight that you have to have decisions. So I'll kind of go through them with you, and then I can answer any questions you might have. So one of the options is, if anybody knows how that circulator runs, it runs in 2 loops. And so one of the recommendations is let me step back just a little bit. The Capital Shuttle is now year-round, thanks to BGS, who has come in and wanted the Capital Shuttle to be year-round. So what happens with this circulator is it's doing some double service. And so we think, in our opinion, and I'll give you the option that we think you might want to consider, is that we would kind of work together with those 2 routes and kind of make it more efficient. But I'll give you some options. And please stop me because unless you know how to read our bus map and guide, it can be a little confusing with loop 1 and loop 2 on the circulator. So option 1 would keep the route and funding as is, which we know is a little bit of it has an average of about 71 people a day right now as is. And so, our feeling is that with the Next Gen study coming in, and with the Capital Shuttle doing what it's doing every day, we could go in and probably make it more efficient and more timely. So the option would be more frequency. So option 2 would be to eliminate loop 2, which most of the route is served now by the Capital Shuttle. The problem with that is it's circuitous, long travel lines. Loop 1 would remain, and we would eliminate service to Loop 2, which is Freedom Drive. And we do have people that pick up on Freedom Drive, so that would be, an option, but it also be, could affect some residents down there. Option 3 is the one that we kind of think would make a lot of sense. It would be basically eliminate Loop 2 and streamline Loop 1 so that it could run in a 30-minute to increase frequency and reduce travel times. The only con to this would be that we would eliminate some of the lower ridership, and that's going to be a recommendation on our Next Gen anyways, is some of the lower ridership that really doesn't make sense, that we would probably have to do any of this, we'd have to have public hearings, et cetera. But that would make a lot more sense, because then we would kind of merge the Capital Shuttle and this option 3, which would give you more service basically on the circulator. So that would be our recommendation.
Could you say that again?
Yes.
So what's your recommended option?
So the recommended option would be to keep the funding as is. We would basically run the service every 30 minutes instead of every 60. We'd give you more frequency, and we would eliminate low ridership areas. But as I said earlier, the paratransit piece of what we're going to be recommending with the Next Gen could pick up some of those residents that would qualify for paratransit, which would be 3/4 of a mile from the fixed route.
So you would change the routes? Is that what you're...
Correct.
As
We would
part of
eliminate some. We would eliminate some of the lower ridership areas. We'd make it a quicker route, so it would be like a 30-minute, and basically it would be more frequency for the city and the residents.
And all three of these options cost the same.
Correct. I could give you one option, and I know you're probably going to want to know, and that's fine. It would be the option 4, which would eliminate Loop 2, reduce Loop 1. The trips would only operate 7 in the morning to 9 in the morning, and then 3:30 to 5:30. So you would miss your midday. So you're basically doing 5 trips in the morning, 5 trips in the evening. That would reduce the $40,000 to approximately $20,000, but it would also eliminate your midday service. So that would be another option, and that would be a reduction in what I think you were asking.
Sure. So I'm wondering about, I know that route is free, and I'm wondering if you've explored what the budget would look like if it wasn't free, and if there was, I think for other routes there are income sensitivities for, you can, if you qualify for various benefits, you can qualify for reduced price or free passes.
Yeah, so the fares really don't impact too much because they're, fairly minimal.
Okay.
They're, $1 a route if we did charge, or 60 cents half, so they really don't impact the budget too much because it's just not enough revenue because it costs, $200,000 to run the route.
Right.
But to answer your question, yes, we are looking at all of that.
Okay.
Gee. I wonder, in your next gen exploration, if you're looking at barriers to ridership, why is the ridership plateaued, or is it still increasing or decreasing?
No, our ridership is pretty much is leveled, but has decreased over, and I'm talking system wide. So it's been between 6 and 10% ridership has gone down throughout the system, and we feel that, and we've done our research on that, and we have about 30 peer agencies that we work with throughout the country, and we basically did a survey from all of them, but 2 were down in ridership between that 6% and 10%. So this is nationwide, and the 2 that were up had just had a brand new transit center that had just come into play, and so the ridership went up because the amenities, made sense. And the other one had to do with, I believe, the way that they did their route changes, similar to what we're doing. So the 2 out of the 30 have had an increase.
So are you thinking that when you suggest option 3, that the increasing the route time to 30 minutes instead of 60 minutes, do you see that as enhancing ridership? Is that one of the barriers?
We believe so. Yeah, these routes are very long, and there are some times when we've had people say, "Well, I can walk to there if I don't have to go all the way out and come back." So we've heard those comments, and these routes have been in play for, I want to say, 8 years maybe. I think that my planning department said 8 years, and so things have changed. So now it's really a good time to really take a look at it and try to build a frequency. In any transit agency, it's efficiency, and it's on time, and that's a big thing, and it's frequency.
I just have one more question.
Sure.
I wonder if you have you any kind of mechanism to survey the general public, folks who maybe aren't in your ridership, and to ask why aren't you, and so on?
Yeah, so during the next gen, during this whole process, we've had a number of public hearings, surveys online. We've had people go on. We've had literally sit on the bus, and then people that were at certain other meetings, we would go into those meetings and like chamber meetings and have conversations. And so we have done a lot of that legwork. So it's been in work for about a year. So we've been doing that. And right now we're in the last phase of outreach, which is municipal outreach. So we're going to meet with all the municipalities and talk to their staff and get some feedback from them as well. So that's where we are. So we have done a lot of outreach and surveys and conversations. Thank you.
One of the things for me, the circulator wasn't made to be a fixed route stop. It wasn't made to have that density. It was made to get into neighborhoods that I get calls from, whether that's out on Elm Street, Heaton Woods, Freedom Drive, which is not in my district, but I hear from people, Terrace Street. So if you are making these changes just to get more ridership versus getting to people who are off the fixed route but need it, what's the impact there?
Well, that will be, I don't think we're trying to gain ridership. I think the frequency issue for us is a big deal. But I do think that some of the fallback could fall back on the paratransit piece that we're working on. Right now, we do deviated fixed route, so we could do 5 stops outside the route and come back in. And so those people who are on that bus have to wait for the 5 stops before they get to their destination. So what we're kind of focusing on is a true fixed route in this area, and then a complementary paratransit, which is mandated by the federal government. So some of the people that we don't serve, or that we may end up coming out of those neighborhoods, could be eligible for that service as well. So we have to kind of work on that. It has to work together.
Well, just a little more in. Just that in, like with your numbers, I know that the mayor made a comment that $10 a ride, he wouldn't take his car out of his driveway. But the fact of it is, for this kind of demand response deviated route, I went on to the 2016 transit facts put out, and definitely $10 per ridership is average, is actually good. Some go as high as $15.22, especially when you get into the smaller transit areas. So I think it's hard to take this route if you're going to get out to the places where people need the ride but don't have the density, and compare it to a fixed route like the one between Barry and Montpelier. So I would just like people to be more open to working with you and using the data you have and making some changes, but not trying to decide those changes tonight. But I still feel very committed to this $40,000 for transit, and we can modify how to use it, but I feel we really need to keep that commitment.
Yeah, and I guess, and I don't really need. We'll work with this route. I was just giving some options. Yeah, and if we come back and the kind of the 40,000 is still the same, then what we'd do is work with staff here and our staff to kind of figure out what's the best option. We tried to combine the 2 capital shuttle and the circulator, and the time points just wouldn't work. We probably worked on this hours just trying to figure out if we could just make them both kind of work together, but time points and they just don't work. So that's why we came up with these options.
Well, likewise, I mean, we've had a request from the school, middle school, to try to reach out to kids across the river, and I think that's another place that's not just numbers, but it's also serving the greater good of the needs.
Mm-hmm. Others, I don't know who's next over here.
Well, so I just have a question about procedure from here, because we're not. This is not something we're putting on the ballot, so we're potentially putting it in the budget, and.
But if we don't put it in the budget, if we don't agree to that tonight,
then
they'll have to go seek signatures to.
Today's the deadline.
They don't have time.
So they wouldn't.
We could. The other option for them is put it on the ballot, but. All right, so I guess I would make the motion that we fund the GMTA through the city budget at the level that we did last year, assuming that they pursue option 3 of limiting Loop 2 and streamlining Loop 1.
Is there a second?
I have an amendment.
Well, first let's see if we have a second. Okay, the motion dies for lack of a second. Do you have a motion?
I would move that we provide the $40,000 in our city budget to fund the GMTA line.
I second it.
So with that,
No,
I'm
you have
puzzled.
a
So we
caveat.
give the money without any direction as to how it gets spent?
Thank you.
I
That's a good
think
point.
there are
That's a good
committees
point.
that do this. There are committees that work with GMTA. There are committees
have
that
a
work with the
commitment to
city
work with it.
who know this way better than I do. I'm not going to sit here and dictate what needs to happen for public transit. I think public transit needs to happen, but I'm not in a position to say what the best option is.
I like your emotion. I like yours better.
I'd like to thank you for the work that you're doing in public transit. I remember my family and I were hit head on by another motorist several years ago and was taken to the hospital and fortunately everyone was okay, but had a couple cracked ribs, and to get to some of the medical appointments for follow-up after that, I used public transit as our car was totaled, and it really made a big impression on me how valuable this service is for people with limited mobility. I really couldn't drive at that point, didn't have a car to drive, and it really made a big impression on me. Also for people coming to our new homeless shelter or coming to access our meal programs here in Montpelier, people coming and going from their jobs, people who have cars but may choose to utilize public transit. That's a goal of this council, and it's a huge service. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I have a couple of questions, and just for additional clarity, the $40,000 that has been moved is or is not part of the...
It's already part of the budget.
It's already included in your 1.9
Technically, you don't have to move
budget.
anything. If you just pass the budget, it's already in there. But
Very helpful, thank you. Wanted to follow up on a discussion from our last meeting. Are you, or is GMTA anticipating, and the state recently released a report on the future sort of autonomous vehicles, and I didn't know if, as you're planning many years out, if you're doing anything at this time to accommodate for that?
So the industry, I don't think we would have thought it is where it is right now today, but I went to the national conference, and there were just meetings on strictly autonomous vehicles. So they're already in play. They're already in some transit agencies that have, say, large campuses, like hospital campuses. They do shuttles. They basically get you to one location, and that vehicle basically takes you all over and drops people off and then comes back. So it's already in play. So it's an interesting, we have started the discussions, but they haven't gone that far because I think everybody's kind of still, I mean, I rode in two of them while I was at the conference. It was pretty cool, actually. So I think that conversation is going to happen sooner than later, like the electric buses. We didn't think that was going to happen. If you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said there's no way this technology is going to be here. And here we are going to order 4 in March. So, you know, I would say the technology is going to creep up on us, and so that is going to be a focus.
Yeah, certainly it seems as though some of the existing vehicles are important for people with disabilities, but that there may be a role for a variety of different types of vehicles in the future.
Agree.
Also wanted to just get an update on when our bus station might be open so that we can start receiving buses as per our most recent timeline. Are we sort of ballpark of when we will start to see GMTA buses in Taylor Street?
We're still looking at construction beginning in May, late May, early June, and so 12 months later, so a year from the spring.
Sure, great. So
yeah, we've had great working relationships with the city on that. So.
It's terrific to hear. I guess lastly, I would just encourage you to explore the increased frequency in terms of when buses come. I think that for people to add on half an hour to a 15 or 20-minute trip, it may discourage some people in terms of both ends on getting to and from places.
Thank you.
Okay, any further? Yeah, Rosie.
I just wanted to really compliment you on the next-gen process. I periodically ride the bus between Montpelier and Barrie, and I followed that process, and I really appreciate the transparency of everything online, the thoroughness of the reports, how responsive your staff is being to people's individual comments, and I also really appreciate the addition of the Route Shout 2.0 app so that we can track when the buses are, and I've found that all those things have made riding much more pleasant, so I appreciate all that work.
Yeah. The next gen's kind of our, okay, we haven't done this in how many years, so now this is kind of the big deal. So we made sure that, you know, transparency is the biggest thing for us. So.
Other questions? All right. The motion seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you
very
very much. Thanks for your work. Okay, next item 6, Montpelier Community Fund Board Grant Recommendations. Good evening. All right, welcome. So, you have recommendations for us.
Yes.
Actually, I think we've already received, so
Yes.
everyone has had a chance to look at those. Rosie, did you want to?
So I did have a chance to look at those, and I saw your note that you had allocated based on a budget of 115,500 rather than the 106,000 that we had initially indicated. I talked to Bill about what our options are here because I didn't feel like we were in a position to cut that, but I also didn't want to throw in an additional 9,500 kind of at the last minute without making a studied decision about that. And so it sounds like we actually have some time in the awarding of the grants, and so we don't need to make a decision tonight on who to make the awards to. So I would be inclined to keep us at the 106,000 level and instruct the board to please come back to us with a recommendation in the very near future about who needs to be, which grants need to be cut to get to that level. That's the amount we've got to spend on this year. And one option certainly is to cut all the grants by about 8%, but I don't know that that is the best or the fairest, and you all have spent a lot of time evaluating all these, so I'd like to leave that decision up to you. But pass the budget tonight with 106,000 and not the increased amount.
So I'd love to respond to
Sure.
that, if I may. Thank you. So since the Montpelier Community Fund Board has been founded a number of years ago, the direction from the City Council has always been to use our collective wisdom and guidance to review and respond to the applications as we received. And in fact, last year received specific direction to really ask for the funds that were deemed necessary to fund the applications that were really critical. So with that direction in mind, we went through our process this year. Last year, the request based on the total applications was $119,550. Upon reviewing the 37 applications that we received this year, we found $115,000 worth of applications that we felt really merited support, which is $4,550 less, a 3.8% decrease from our request last year. So after we went through that process, reviewing the 37 applications, meeting as a board, we then had heard the $106,000 figure post decision making, and so we are here tonight as we usually are at this time to make our recommendations to the board, and wanted to share with you that we're making our recommendations based on the process that we've been instructed to use in years prior and with the guidance that we've had in years prior. I also understand that the $106,000 figure was developed based on some rationalization around the Just Basics grant. So we'd love to talk about that specifically, if that would help bring some light to the situation as well.
Sure.
Let me just, before you do that, I do want to just comment on your statement, Christine, that this is the way that it's always, the fund has been directed. So, because that's not my understanding of, and what I think, my recollection of how we've proceeded with it since we created it. The council has always, in my experience, set a target, a number, a cap that the fund had available to allocate. And I think there was so in the early years, there were several years where the recommendations came in under that cap. And I think it was last year, maybe it was the year before, there were some members of the council who thought that that cap should actually be an amount that is fully allocated. So maybe the confusion arose around that direction, but I think there was never been any direction by the council to provide recommendations of any amount that exceeded the allocation that was given by the council or through the staff. So I just want to, this is unique, the first time in our 5 years, I think, of this, that we've gotten recommendations that exceed the amount that's been budgeted.
I think that I know the answer, but I don't like to assume things. When did you make your decisions about what to recommend for the organization?
At the meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so December 13th.
Okay. And when did the council set the dollar amount? The 106, or when did city staff set the 106?
It was after our meeting, is
Oh, after.
as we heard about, no, we heard about
We heard
a
it right
recommendation from
as
the city.
just as we were about to meet.
Right. It was literally like the day of, we heard a recommendation from city
Was
manager.
there
If you
any-
look,
I
if you
mean-
look at the meeting, the minutes of the meeting, the item number 3 is that we received, and I'll just read it. The MCF board received a memo from Todd Provencher dated November 30th, 2017, that the city is taking over Just Basics Feast. That, quote, since the Feast Meals program has been absorbed by the senior center, it was logical to move the funding source with the program costs, end quote, and therefore, the city manager is recommending in his budget presentation that the city council reduce the amount allocated to the Montpelier Community Fund Board from 120 to 106. So we went into that meeting just having heard that we were only supposed to have 106,000
Going into what meeting?
into the meeting for the
Voting meeting.
making the awards.
To make the decisions.
And when did
Your
the
committee
city
meeting?
know that, though? When did the city know that that money was going to be shifted?
So we notified them. I'm just trying to find actually the communications. I have it.
November 30th was what I
When
had-
the committee got the note, I'm just
Right.
wondering when
So
the
that-
city staff.
Right. So that would have been the week after Thanksgiving. So that's the week we would have finished the budget. And so as soon as we finished it and realized that this was a change, we notified them immediately.
It just strikes me that that would be the kind of thing that, like, that the city would have known about beforehand, since, I mean, that just strikes me that notifying them on a day when everything has sort of been this thing, and then I understand why it happened, and I wanted you to read that piece into the meeting. It just strikes me that that's something that the city should have been aware of before that, and knowing that we were going into this process, I just don't understand why we're going to hold that against this committee who volunteers their time, reviews these applications. I mean, these applications are from community groups across the area that serve really at-risk, needy populations for these services, and I think we as a city have an obligation to be transparent in what we're doing with this fund and why this fund exists, and to say on the day of that all of a sudden we're cutting the budget by $14,000 for groups that serve our most vulnerable populations just doesn't really pass the sniff test to
Well, it's
me.
not, I mean, honestly, Ashley, it's not cutting the funding. There was a chunk of money that had been funded by the fund that was going to be funded through the general fund. So the money that was available had not changed for the, assuming that the same applicants were received for the same scope of services. The same money was going to be available. So there was no funding reduction. And I did want to just add one other element that I think needs part of this discussion, and that are the petitions that we're going to be considering later tonight to add another $26,000 in additional spending for services that in the past have been funded through the Montpelier Community Fund. So if we add the $115,000 that you're requesting and the $26,000 that will be going on the ballot, that's $141,000 for a scope of services that in the past, when we first created the fund, were funded at $100,000. So that's a 41% increase in this item of the budget that is dramatically higher than any, as far as I know, perhaps any other element of our budget, and without any real decision. I mean, it just seems to me this, I mean, I think at one point we made some decision to increase it by some amount, but it seems to me this fund has grown in a fairly dramatic manner without decision within the council as to whether we want to, this is where we want to put scarce tax dollars. So I'm concerned about the growth of it, both in terms of these off-petition items, but also this confusion that seems to arise about whether there's a spending limit within the board and what that is. So, Justin and then Ann.
So historically, the council has always, I agree with the sentiment, to not get involved in making any individual adjustments, that we've always trusted that you're doing that, and thank you for making these recommendations. I think we should continue that process. It occurred to me that in previous years, when this group has not allocated the full amount that was in the budget, there would have been leftover money. And I'm curious sort of and I don't know if we have that number available tonight, but it was several $1,000s in the beginning that the council had allocated as part of the budget process, but that wasn't spent. And so I'm just thinking perhaps that leftover money from previous years would help bridge this gap that we find this year. I also think it's important to recognize that the work that you do potentially limits or helps avoid the ballot workaround that we are seeing in this year's ballot and saw in last year's ballot. And so it seems to me we should either fully fund and maintain this process that there was a lot of work put into in establishing, or let people go on the ballot, because at this point we're kind of seems to be moving towards doing both, which of course is well within residents' rights to petition. But we have now two kind of processes by which they can access funds. There's so much important work being done by these nonprofits. I don't think anyone disagrees that the scope of what is being done in our community with this money is huge. For me to see the amount that we're giving the community fund going down at a time when city budgets continue to go up seems a little backwards to me. In the past, I have advocated to increase funding to be distributed so that you can at least come closer to or meet need.
Christine.
So, if I may,
Oh, I'm sorry. Ann had.
I'm sorry.
So you can go ahead. That's all right, if you like.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to respond to a couple of the points that have been brought up to date. One is that clearly the Montpelier Community Fund Board doesn't have control over the nonprofits who are seeking to go on the ballot and ask for funds directly from the city voters. And in fact, we have seen a direct relationship between our efforts to create what we feel like is a greater degree of equity and parity in the grants made to nonprofits that we inherited, those grant amounts that we historically had inherited from the original ballot, and our efforts to create some equity and parity among those items, which meant for some organizations trying to cut to some degree their grants in order to what we felt more fairly distribute grant funding among a wider variety of organizations. And so our effort to do that has most likely directly resulted in at least one organization pursuing the ballot option, which obviously is not within our control. We still think we made the right decision. The other piece that I would put out there is that the pool of applicants is different every year. So, with every grant funding process, this is an open process. We have a number of nonprofits who apply to us every year, usually between 35 and 45, and that pool shifts every year. And in fact, there's new nonprofits as new organizations find out about this process, or new people come up with creative ideas to serve the city. There are new organizations coming to this process and looking for funding. And so, we have a small amount of money that each year we're trying to stretch further and further and further. And so that is an inherent challenge, again, with this work. The last piece I would put out there is that perhaps there's been a misunderstanding, and it sounds like there has been, between the City Council and this body as far as a budget cap or a budget line item allocated to this process. But in my time on the Community Fund Board, the process that I have experienced is that we come with recommendations. They've been approved to date. It can be approved or declined. And then our understanding is that that figure is then included in the city budget. And if there had in the past been a budget line item for the Montpelier Community Fund Board, we have been operating unaware of that fact. So it's good to, if that is the process, then we would like to know that and be able to work with those bounds. But our understanding is that that budgeting was happening based on the recommendations that we were bringing forth each time.
Well, I just don't think that, I guess Bill can talk about that more directly, but the process has always been that the board's recommendations have come within the proposed budget recommendation from the city manager. This is the first time that number has exceeded that budget figure, and that the board has always coordinated its work with the recommended budget figure of the city manager.
So I think everybody's right here. But there's some differences in timing, and actually texting back and forth here with the finance director and others. We previously, I think you started your processes earlier, and so the early in our budget process, usually around the time we were preparing the city's budget, this group did come and say, we think we need 115, let's say, and the council would say, yes, we're going to put that in the budget. So that would become an untouchable budget number for us on staff, and then you go through your process. This year, so then we do our budget that first week. This year, that conversation didn't happen. Your applications weren't due till November 27th, and we do our budget the 27th, 8th, or 28th, 9th, and 30th in staff, that right after Thanksgiving. We had a budget cap, so to respond to, we weren't trying to penalize the committee. We were trying to keep hold the amount of money that went to the same amount of programs as the mayor said. So without knowing what you had for applications, we said, all right, well, we spent this much last year, and some of it was for this feast program. So if we're paying for feast, let's keep the rest whole. And as soon as we completed on the 30th, that's when we, once our staff knew, trying to meet the council's budget limit, we immediately said, all right. In fact, you were the only group that we released any budget information to, because normally I don't tell anybody what's in the budget until I give it to the city council as a public document. But we wanted to make sure that you had the info as soon as we could get it to you, saying, just so you know, it's 106, not 115. So I think we missed that earlier, say October, early November conversation that we've had in the past. So you're right, you brought the recommendations, the council said it, but it was never as late in the process. So I think that's what's happened, and that's how we got here. But I know from our end, we wanted to make sure you knew that there was a number change as soon as we knew what we were going to recommend. And of course, it's up to the council to decide what the final number is.
And
Yep. So, thank you all for your work on this. I just want to acknowledge that I think I've expressed this in past years that I trust this committee, and whatever it is that you think is worth awarding, I trust that you all have done your due diligence and have wanted to know in past years if the amount needed to increase from the year prior. And this is, in my mind, within the range of what we've been allocating in the past, and so it seems appropriate to me. It's not that unusual. And in thinking about the grand scope of the economics of it over time, we just came out of a conversation, just a few weeks ago about the future of this fund and the inclination that other groups may have to not go through the community fund and to get on the ballot. And I think if we send them back to say, cut 8% or find people who you don't actually think are worthy, then that will send the message to those groups that maybe they shouldn't go through this process, and that they will abandon it and go back to the generous voters of Montpelier. And so, I guess even if the goal is to keep costs down in the long run, even if even if that were the goal, right, then I think it's probably wisest for us to honor the request of 115. So,
Rosie.
I'm feeling really uncomfortable because I don't have a good sense of where we're at with the budget right now. We had kind of set a cap, and there's a range around there where I'm comfortable, and if we're still in that range, then fine. But I feel like we're creeping out of it, and so I don't know if Bill can.
We're
tell
at about
us.
2.3% right now, with all in with ballot items.
And including this full request or not? So this full request probably doesn't affect that.
2.4%.
Okay.
I don't know. I'd have to do a quick calculation.
Okay, that's a little better than I thought we were at, so that makes me feel a little bit more
We're
comfortable.
going to go through it in the next item.
What's that?
We're going to go right through it in next item.
Okay. I guess my personal opinion is we did set a cap, and I'm really cautious about budget creep. But if the rest of the council feels really strongly that they're okay with this, then I'm willing to go along with that.
I'm just going to say, I think that this sets a really dangerous precedent. I'm not going to, this is the last time I want to comment on it, but I think that with every other item in this budget, within the budget, we have set a cap and said this is what the Montpelier voters can afford. And I think what I'm hearing from other councilors is that this is an area where we should say this should be needs-driven. And I think if that's going to be the case, you're going to see, you've already seen a lot more applicants. I suspect that's because it's a lot easier to apply for a grant from this organization than it is to go on the ballot. And as time goes on, it becomes more apparent. It's easier for people to understand. It becomes more widely known, and your demand's going to grow. And so, and clearly there's greater demand in this community for services than $115,000. I mean, I think that's just likely a number that people think that's in the range. But as it becomes known that this isn't a cap, this is just a program that's driven by need, you're going to see dramatic increases. And I think that's just not an appropriate way to set a budget. We make all kinds of difficult decisions within the context of what we can afford, not what we think we should be spending. And I think this is setting us a different standard for this program that I think is going to result in some real significant challenges in the future if that's the policy that the council wants to take.
Just to challenge a couple of assumptions there, I mean, there is an application process that applicants have to go through, which is not the same as getting the requisite number of signatures, which, I mean, requires certainly shoe leather politics because you got to go door to door, but putting together an application, I mean, I've written grant applications. That is not an easy process by any means, and I would frankly prefer people to go through this process because there are community members who are reviewing this, who are seeing what the services that are provided to Montpelier by this organization is, the population served. I mean, I think that clearly, I think Bill articulated an issue that the city needs to address, which is when do we notify groups about what their limits are? You know, and I think that warrants a bigger conversation about, you know, these committees that we're asking to do this work. But I think that this is the way to go. I mean, having a committee that reviews these applications rather than just going straight to the ballot, I mean, that way the city knows what it's spending its money on. When there's an application process, the city council gets a write-up of what the organization does, what the history is with this board and this organization. And to me, I mean, it sort of highlights a communication breakdown, which was this memo went out the same day that their meeting was. The understanding was a little bit different because the timing had been different in the past. So I think that the council or the city needs to set a clear deadline for when, you know, when the city is going to get this information out and when the expectation that we receive information back is.
Thank you for the comment. But I'd also like to point out that we had requests for $143,282. So it wasn't as if we were just, you know, going through, say, okay, not okay, okay, not okay. We had to make some decisions. We realized that there was a cap somewhere, and that we were not, you know, and that we were constrained to make decisions based on what we thought was a fair presentation, with also accountability for what money had been allocated the previous years, reviewing that. And in a couple of cases, we reduced we gave less because we felt that we had not received information that showed how the money that had been given the previous years had been spent. So I think it's not as if we were simply giving a pass to everybody who walked in the door, and I think that that's important to recognize. Also, in one case, the issue of the feast money being suddenly moved from the community fund into the budget had two effects. I think one was to say, okay, we don't have. We don't have that, we appear not to have that money, but it also, Just Basics had put in an application for 2 new projects, which we thought were important. And so the question was, do we penalize one applicant because some of their money has already been moved somewhere else without, out of our authority at this point? And so we say, well, they've got their money, we will just dismiss the other projects that came. And we decided that that didn't seem to be a good idea either. Although I'm a little reluctant to do this, but I will say it anyway, 2 applicants who had been receiving money steadily over the years missed the deadline, and they happen to be on the ballot now. So, there's a case where, it was not, if we had had their applications in as we had expected, we would have made some other decisions to try to accommodate what we saw as, as a need that's being met, but with a project. So I think the committee was put in a kind of difficult position by all of a sudden having this less money here, with very little notice and with really some pretty bad options to pursue if given those circumstances.
If I might just add one data point to Michael's point, I would just say that Just Basics proposal this year indicated a 66% increase in the number of people that they're serving now this year over last.
Okay, over here, Justin and then Donna.
If you look at the list of these nonprofits on page 7 of the agenda, these are groups that are helping people in our community. And I am strongly in favor of letting them do what they do best, which is to keep helping people and not have to tramp around collecting hundreds of signatures, which is really distracting them from their core function. I would move to accept and fund the Montpelier Community Fund as recommended for FY19.
I would second that.
All right, further discussion? Donna, do you have anything else?
No, that's what I was going to say.
All right. All right, hearing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank you all very much for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Smoother next year. Okay, next item, budget public hearing. Did you have another?
Yeah, I was going to do it. In fact, I actually have my PowerPoint covers the budget, the bonds, the charter, and the warning. If you want to just run through I can split them up, or we can just run through the whole thing, and then you may make some changes.
Are you setting up a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Can we take a break?
Sure can. Oh, it's not me to tell you that. Oh, hello, everybody. I've actually drafted outlines of the 4 issues that are up for public hearings, and I also have this PowerPoint for the school superintendent. Brian Ricka is here, who wants to quickly go through the school budget as well. So when I'm completed, he'll do his thing, I think. So just with the caveat that all the budget numbers I'm going to give you are now $9,500 short. Having said that, so I'm going to walk through the proposed budget, the bond issues, the charter changes, and the annual meeting warning. Obviously, those can still be addressed individually, but I just put them all together. So the budget is as was approved by the council on January 10, and it's subject to additional changes made tonight, as we've seen. The council the budget is based around council goal of affordability. This requires a 2.3% tax rate increase, which approximates CPI. That includes all the, again, prior to the 9,500, all of the ballot items and everything else that's on the ballot. Personnel costs were up only 1.5%, and we used our long-term budget as a guide. I'm not going to read all of these, just hit some of the key highlights. One of our goals is good governance. The budget included many of the things that we had consisted in our goals. One of the things we hope to accomplish was a citizen survey, which isn't included, but we'll take a look at maybe other ways of funding that. Public safety is important, and we funded our public safety departments at sufficient levels. We weren't able to expand in some areas that we'd hoped, and the council has chosen to put the CVPSA ballot item on as well. Economic development, we've kept the $100,000 in funding for the Montpelier Development Corporation. We've kept our planning staff to implement our new zoning and master plan, and we are continuing to support a possible TIF application. Housing, last year we increased the housing for the Housing Trust Fund from $21,000 to $60,000, and we kept that funding at the same this year. Has funds for completing 1 Taylor Street. Quality of life, many of the things that have been included before, the Downtown Improvement District, Montpelier Alive, community enhancements, downtown projects are all included. In our healthy and welcoming community, we kept funding in the parking fund for alternative transportation. We kept funding for the bike path, our community and arts fund that we just talked about, and the feast program, which was moved to the senior center. For infrastructure, we've got a CIP plan, which was fully funded. We're proposing 2 bonds for infrastructure improvements. We've added an engineering position in DPW and continued other plans that we've had. For environment, we continued funding for the Energy Advisory Committee, stormwater projects, and we just talked about the GMT circulator bus. So very quickly, where does the money come from? As you can see, our budget is funded about 65% from property taxes, others grants, revenues, and fund transfers. So some of transfers between the water fund, parking fund, sewer fund. Where do we spend it? You can see the bulk is in public safety and in infrastructure. community services and our general government services. Taking a look at cutting that slightly differently. And I know I'm going quickly because I know we have a lot to talk about tonight. There's a huge amount of detail on all of this. If anybody's interested, happy to provide it or answer any questions. Cutting this separately, you can see that we are about 55%, 54% personnel. We've got our capital plan. Ballot items are about 3%. Operating costs about 20%. So what does that mean? Our property tax rate would rise from 1.055 cents to 1.079 cents. It's 2.4 cents or 2.3%. Average tax bill of about $55. Our other rates, water and sewer rates, are planned to 2.5%, and other rates, well, no increase in those sewer and CSO benefit rates. Just this is a quick chart. This will be in your annual report. It's just taking a look at each service we provide, breaking up our budget, and then netting out any revenues that department generates. So this is the net tax cost for our various services, and it's just you can see how much the average tax bill pays for various services. So just under $500 for police, and $350 for public works, $340 for fire, EMS, et cetera. So you can see kind of what your a la carte looks like. So that's the end of the budget. Again, happy to answer questions on all of this. We are proposing 2 bonds. One is a water and sewer bond for water lines on Main Street, Legue, Canal, and Clarendon. $500,000 for sewer lines on Legue, Canal, and Clarendon. So obviously, some of that work is coordinated. The Main Street line is the line near the middle school that's given us failure problems, and so allow doing that. General fund infrastructure bond is for $450,000 to complete the alternate transportation path, $360,000 for sidewalk improvements, and $190,000 for the One Taylor project, the Taylor Street project, and other accelerated infrastructure if needed. So we don't have to float the whole bond, but we've talked about trying to speed up some of our improvements. There's also a $4.9 million bond for school improvements, which I will leave to Superintendent Ricca to discuss. So those are the bonds that will be on the ballot. And the numbers inside 11, 12, and 13 are currently the article numbers on the ballot, in case you're wondering what those are. Charter change. The city's proposing 4 charter changes, also required to have a public hearing tonight. The first one reflects the creation of the new Montpelier-Roxbury School District, so it basically deletes a whole section of language about the Montpelier School Department and reflects this new independent district. The second is to amend election filing deadlines to coincide with general state statute. Our current charter currently has its own filing deadline for candidacy, which doesn't match any other community and the general statutes. So we're amending that so we'll be in sync with neighboring communities and with other across the state. The third charter change amends the size of the DRB and sets specific terms for the DRB and Planning Commission members. We currently have 5 members on the DRB, but have functioned with 7 for a long time, so this is amending the charter to actually make it 7, and also setting specific beginning and end date for terms. Right now, our members of these committees are all over the place, so we want to there'll be one date, I think it's May for the Planning Commission and October for the DRB, that will appoint all of the people for those set terms at those times. And finally, we're eliminating the collections of personal property tax for items valued under $10,000. So these are can often be $2. If the value is 10, the bill is $1.56 or $3 or something like that. So $30. So we are eliminating the nuisance collection of those small personal property taxes. That's the charter changes. And then the warning as it's currently drafted, and I know there will be considerations of adding other items or changing items, but the first 3 items are the election of city, school, and public safety authority officers. The next 3 items are city, school, and public safety authority budgets. So the next 3 items are the compensation for elected officials, mayor, city council, and school board members. The authorization for the school reserve fund, which is an annual appropriation. The 11 through 13 are the 3 city and school bonds I just went over. 14 is the annual authorization for the Downtown Improvement District. 15 is the funding for the Kellogg Hubbard Library. 16 through 19 are the 4 charter changes I just outlined. 20 to 22 are the 3 agency petitions that we've received, presuming they'll put on the ballot. And then there's 23, there's a non-financial petition regarding state renewable energy policy. So that is the draft budget as it sits right now. And again, we need to have a public hearing on all of that. So that's quickly running through the 4 items. Certainly can talk about any of these in any more detail. Excuse me. So with regard to the warning, this is related to the whole overall budget. When you look at the tax distribution, this just shows with the city, school, and everybody else in there. You can see how your tax breaks out. And this is the overall picture to answer the question. So with all in, including school, we're looking at about 2.4% increase with everybody included. So when you look at the warning as a whole, if everything passed, this is what it would have looked like coming into tonight. So tonight is the public hearing. The voting is on Tuesday, March 6th, 7 to 7, with the early voting slated to start on February 9, I'm told.
Registering for requesting an early ballot is already underway.
Right.
But the ballots will be available.
Okay, so that is the schedule. So any questions or comments? And obviously these are public hearings, so happy to take anyone's questions. And that's it. 4 public hearings in 1. Oh, excuse me. No, now we get to school. Almost got out of
Can
this.
I make one comment on that?
You sure
before
may.
we finish? So I just wanted to mention briefly the increase in compensation for the council and the mayor. I noticed that the reporter from the Times-Argus wasn't there that night, and so that did not get covered in any of the various local newspapers. And I didn't want anybody to think that we were slipping that in, or anyone to compare what we had put in this year or last year and think that that was trying to be done secretively. It's not mentioned in the warning that it's a change. So just throwing that out there, that you can go back and watch our discussion on that. We had some discussion on that in a previous meeting, but it wasn't intended to be hidden in there.
Do you have a PowerPoint as well, or should we turn the lights up? Okay.
And as the superintendent comes to this circle here, I just want to recognize that I'm an employee of the school district, and so I'm going to be recusing myself for this portion of the conversation.
There are extras over here. Thank you and good evening. I will try to do as well as Bill did with my budget. I would like to summarize briefly and succinctly the work that we have done in the FY19 budget for, as Bill mentioned, the Montpelier Roxbury Public Schools. With the merger that was passed in June, we are planning for 4 schools next year, the 3 here in town and the Roxbury Village School. The budget that we are about to run through with you contains no reductions in force and is framed in the Unified District's motto of personalization, community, and sustainability, backed by our continuous improvement plan. On December 1st, Vermont Digger reported that per pupil spending is growing faster than the Vermont economy or Vermont wages, and that the average tax rate is going up 9.4 cents, or 7% on average. As of tonight, the Montpelier tax increase on the education side is less than half of what was predicted. Right now we're looking at 4.3 cents, and that is an increase of 2.6%, not the 7 that was predicted. What that looks like is $43 per 100,000 of assessed house value. According to the city manager, the average home in Montpelier is at $228,000, meaning an increase on the education side. No, you're fine.
Oh.
You're fine. You can go back. Meaning an increase on the education side of $98, or a little less than $25 a quarter for education taxes. For the Roxbury community, their education taxes will decrease by 2.5 cents. Recently, Governor Scott has called for school districts that have rising enrollment, like Montpelier Roxbury Public Schools has and will continue to have through at least the next 3 fiscal years, to increase their equalized per pupil spending by no more than 2.5%. As Mayor Holler knows from his time on the school board, this is the most important figure to concern yourselves with when you think about education spending in the state of Vermont. Our current increase is more than a percentage point below what Governor Scott has called for. It is 1.3% on our education spending per pupil. If not for the capital plan, which is included in our operating budget, and the bond, which is a separate issue, a separate article, we would be returning money to the Montpelier taxpayers for the second year in a row. The Agency of Education and the Agency of the Administration have suggested that there be at least a 5-to-1 adult to student ratio in pre-K-12 delivery systems of education in the state of Vermont. Ours is predicted to be, ours is currently 5.3-to-1. Please understand that we did not build our budget to meet or exceed these goals. We built this budget to ensure a successful merger, one of our themes, to focus on equity and personalization, and to meet all of the needs in the schools, the 4 schools that serve 3 grade levels in 2 communities with one motto: personalization, community, and sustainability. Another goal from the school board this year was to stabilize our future year tax rates. As you may know, part of the incentives for a merger include a tax cent reduction. This year we'll see an 8-cent tax reduction, a 6-cent next year, 4-cent the following year, 2 cents the following year, and so on until we're at a level fund with Roxbury. And so we've purposefully built in costs this year, one-time costs that will not be there for next year's operating budget to absorb the 2-cent reduction, which would, if you think about it, look like a 2-cent increase. Some of the challenges that we face: there's an estimated education fund shortfall of about $80 million statewide. And at the end of last year's legislative session, there was the healthcare compromise, which included a clawback of an additional $65,000 onto next year's budget. And we saw a 10.1% rate increase on our healthcare. And the challenges continued in terms of our tax rate. We saw a significant drop in the dollar yield and an increase in the non-residential tax rate to backfill the ed fund. The dollar yield is a number that is set by the legislature. We were expecting it to go up perhaps a percentage point. It actually dropped 3.1%. And so that's been a big factor for us. Next page, please. Thank you. So here is our residential tax rate calculation. I will try to do this without boring you too much. Our operating budget is here. The combined, you'll see, I'll start over here. This was our operating budget last year's Montpelier. This was Roxbury's operating budget. So only for this year will you see this combined, or else I wouldn't be able to give you any comparisons in terms of what the 2 districts did. Our operating budget this year that we're proposing is $23,084,695. Our grant funds are in this number here. We're proposing a capital plan which is in the operating budget already, and the proposed bond that we have that I'll go through briefly in a few slides will include a first-year interest-only payment of $118,000. So, moving down further, our total general fund budget is the $23,452,706. From that, you subtract the non-tax revenues of almost $4 million. This right here is our education spending number of $19.5 million. From the blue box here, this is a 6.5% increase. Without our capital plan and the bond, it would only be 4.5%. So 2% of this is being driven by much needed attention to our buildings. Our equalized pupils, and this is the really good news, folks. In Montpelier alone, we had equalized pupils, which is not a head count. It's a weighted 2-year calculation of the number of students that we have. I won't bore you with the calculation, but suffice it to know it's not an actual head count. Plus our Roxbury cohort added in at 86. Again, that's not a head count. It's a weighted 2-year average. So we were looking at about 1165 or so. Our calculation came in over 1,200. And this is the first time this number has been over 1,200 in the 7 years that I've served in Montpelier. And it's an increase of 60. That directly drives down the local tax rate. So as we gain more students, the tax rate in town decreases. And so with the education spending here of $19.5 million divided by the equalized pupils, this is our this is our spending per pupil, the number that is most important in terms of how taxes are calculated. And as I said, this is an increase of only 1.3%. Had we not included the capital plan and the bond, this would actually be a reduction in the education spending in town. There's no excess spending penalty. As you see, Roxbury had one last year. There's no excess spending penalty here. And our adjusted ed spending per pupil is $15,923.77, the same number. This number that's highlighted in yellow is the property dollar yield. It was delivered as by statute on December 1st by the tax commissioner, but it has to be set by the legislature before it adjourns in May, and there's no telling what will happen to that between now and then, so we're basing this on the tax commissioner's letter. So when you take the ed spending per pupil divided by the property yield, you get an equalized residential tax rate of 161.8. You see here for Montpelier, there's the 8-cent tax reduction that is our merger incentive. And then, as I've said, I think consistently for the past 6 years that I've done this, the backhanded compliment is that the CLA went down again in town. And our estimate here is that that impacted our tax rate by about 3.3%. What that means, it's a calculation that's used to ensure that people are paying the same level regardless of the town that they live in. And the fact that the Montpelier CLA is going down means there continues to be a lot of competition for housing in Montpelier, and so people are paying more than the assessed value for the house. So with all of that said, here is the tax rate for Montpelier that I shared with Bill, $1.66 and a little higher. The Roxbury one is over here. Their CLA also went down, and they're paying $1.69. Okay. Residential tax rate impacts, as I shared, about $43 per 100,000. It works out to be a little bit less than $100 on the education side for the average home in Montpelier. As you can see, the Roxbury folks are they have decreased. Please note, though, and this is apparently going to be a topic for conversation in the legislature, households with income under $90,000, which is about 60% statewide, have income sensitivity, so may not be paying the entire amount that you see here. This is a big topic of conversation. Our 706 committee, the merger study of which the new board chair, Jim Murphy, who's here with me, did a tremendous amount of work in order to try to predict how much we were going to spend. The ed spending was predicted to be about $18.9 million from the merger study committee, and we came in closer to $19.5. But as you see here, it did not include the capital plan, interest for the first year of a bond. And this is the number that I was telling you about. We've put almost $200,000 in one-time expenses into this operating budget that will not be there next year in order to absorb not only the 2 cents less of a merger incentive, but also in the second year of a bond, you pay interest and principal. And so that will be a substantial uptick. But part of the method to the madness was to put in as much as we thought we could do reasonably in terms of one-time facilities funds that or facilities projects that won't be there next year, and that's separate from the capital plan, and that's separate from the bond. So we are taking a real hard look at improving the quality of our buildings. We've had special education costs that we can never always budget appropriately for, but please note that there is state reimbursement for all of those. And the Roxbury deficit that they came to the table with is being covered by our overall fund balance. Again, the committee estimated about a 1.48 residential tax rate. We came in at 1.54, and here are the big cost drivers to that. Last year, the merger study committee anticipated a little bit more for the dollar yield. It came in at 98.42. That difference right there is 7.4 cents. If that's even level funded from last year, we're right at the number that they recommended. And that doesn't even include the capital plan bond. The higher one-time projects was about 5 cents. And in that study, they estimated the equalized pupils at 1180, which was a modest increase, and we came in a bit higher. This is the list of bond projects and estimates. The board asked us during the January 10th meeting to come in under $5 million. We were slightly over. All of these projects are in a state of, if not critical, approaching critical. UES has work that needs to be done on the electrical power distribution, fire alarm and PA, as well as elevator replacement. A renovation of the playground that we are trying desperately to get off the ground if we can ever get the soils to where they need to be. And we're calling this new improved area of MHS our Wellness and Arts Wing. It includes auditorium renovations, wellness center and training room, locker rooms, offices, and a family restroom, as well as classroom improvement to the restrooms in the lobby, roof replacements, and an upgrade of heating and ventilation. most of which have not had a lot of attention in the past easily 20 to 25 years. Notably, Main Street Middle School is not there, but I want to point out that in the past year and a half, we've spent over $400,000 using not only facilities fees, but reserve funds to make adjustments to the work at Main Street Middle School. And as you'll see on the next slide, the bathroom renovations are the second item in FY20. And based on the timing of the bond, if it passes, and the construction cycle, including mostly summer work, it's probable that the MSMS bathrooms are going to be replaced about the same time that the work begins in earnest on some of the big projects this year. And this was another desire of the board to see a capital plan. This year, this capital plan is built right into the operating budget, so we do have $250,000 set aside for roof replacement at the high school. Next year, we anticipate this being a capital fund, which would be a separate ballot item. But because the board was contemplating a bond, we wanted to go ahead and put the money in for this year and show not only the board but the public how serious we are about caring for our buildings going forward. You can see we're ranging in costs from about $250,000 to $280,000. These first 2 years are pretty much set and are hard numbers. We know these projects we're going to do. As we get further out, these are softer numbers, but we also want to give everybody, not only on the board but in the community, a sense of the care that we're trying to take for all of our buildings. As we look forward, the dollar yield should not decrease as drastically. We're hoping it doesn't ever drop another 3% and have to backfill the ed fund as much. Our equalized pupil count shouldn't increase as drastically. At the same time, it is projected to increase at least over the next 3 years, and that's only good news for folks in town. As I mentioned a number of times, the tax incentive decreases 2 cents per year, but we have planned for what that's going to look like, and the board was very clear that they want to make sure that the tax rate is somewhere remotely close to stabilization among the factors that we can control. Enrollment and staffing, we're both likely to see increases through FY22, and that impact should be minimal. As our pupil growth grows, our spending per pupil should be about the same. We're going to see some expenditures decreasing as part of the merger. There was grandparenting instead of grandfathering for students in Roxbury who already had school choice. So we will tuition the students who are in 9th through 12th grade, and then the following year it'll only be 10th through 12th grade, 11th through 12th grade, and finally only 12th graders. This year's 7th graders at Roxbury Village School, this year's no, wait a minute. If there's someone who's in 7th grade, this year's 7th graders will come to Montpelier Public Schools next year as 8th graders. So starting from 7th grade down, all students in Roxbury Village School will come to Montpelier Public Schools for grades 5 through 12, Main Street Middle School and Montpelier High School. We're going to see a decrease as we go forward in the one-time facilities projects. We're hoping to see transportation aid increase, but we won't see that for 2 years until FY21. We're going to be adding buses, and that's part of what's built into our overall budget. We need to not only have buses to continue to bring students in Roxbury to the Roxbury Village School. They already have a contract that we'll be working with to change, but we need to have a bus to bring not only students from Roxbury to Montpelier, but also the board is committing to having a late bus or a late van to ensure that Roxbury Village students can participate in co-curriculars and after-school activities. And in terms of bond expenditures, the existing bond payments are going to be fairly level. The facilities bonds are going to decrease, but our Vermont Municipal Employees Retirement System bond is going to increase, but we've known that. And as I mentioned earlier, the new bond that hopefully will be passed that we're taking on is going to see a large increase in FY20, but will decrease each year afterward. Bottom line, it's a 1.3% increase in per pupil spending, and that is excellent news and a credit to the board and the leadership team for ensuring that the work that we are doing is at a manageable spending amount. And I will continue to remind folks it would be a return on education taxes if we did not include the capital plan and bond, which we need. The overall residential tax rate increase is 2.6%, and it's a 1.5% decrease for Roxbury. And I'd be happy to take questions if people have them.
I just need to ask, does the council need to vote on this? Okay, I need to recuse myself as well. I did not realize that because of my position with Agency of Education.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Any questions for Jim or Brian? It's largely a formality. We don't have any control of your budget, but we appreciate all of your work.
I would just comment briefly that, in talking to people from U32 surrounding towns too, they're constantly curious about how things are going here in Montpelier, and I'm proud to say, I tell them we've got some great schools here. Thank you for both for making that happen. CLA is also, numeric evidence to some degree of the interest in living in Montpelier. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion to approve that part, or do we do everything?
Should open the public hearing, too.
Okay, so
Public
we
hearings
have
on budget,
public-
bonds, charter.
Do we have a separate vote on this
No.
item?
When you set the warning, you put the ballot item on.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is a public hearing for our budget or any other items been discussed. Anyone have any comments? Okay, so what's our next, I guess? Yeah, the public hearing would be on any of these items. So the budget, the charter, and the bonds that you've heard about. Okay, not hearing any comments on those. So then we have the petitions to consider.
Turn that over to the city clerk.
Well, you've heard Bill's description of the charter items, and they're the same ones that you all approved before, so you're probably familiar with them. They are going to, well, you've also seen the warning, so you'll see how they will appear on there, which does make it incumbent on us to make the actual text available as widely as possible, including printing it out and putting it every voting booth. But I don't know if you all have any questions about any of them.
Pretty straightforward, I think. Covered them all. Thank you.
And then there was a request to add an item to what's the next?
It's the CVT, the Central Vermont Internet.
Right. So we do have somebody here. Jeremy's here, I think, to make that presentation. Did you, Donna, this was your request to put
Yes.
this on the agenda. Did you have anything you wanted to comment about?
Know that I hope that we support putting it on the ballot and that voters will support it. It's an opportunity for us to upgrade community-wide fiber.
We're confused.
So could we separate out these items just because I would prefer to not vote on the school portion of it.
You don't actually have to vote on a school portion. All you do is vote to approve the warning. When we put those school items on, so when we vote for the warning, you could just recuse yourself on the two school articles.
Okay.
Just note for the record, I don't think it's a real, we can't change.
Got you. Okay.
There's nothing
Fair
we
enough,
can
because
do.
I'm really excited to vote for this.
Did you turn the projector off?
I did, but I can undo that. Sorry about that.
No worry.
So he does have this as an attachment to our agenda as well as what he's presenting, in case you want to know.
Let's try that.
Sometimes it takes a second.
Those are your mics. Pull them.
Okay. How's that? There we go. So, thanks for having me tonight. I'm Jeremy Hansen. I'm a professor down at Norwich University. I teach computer security, programming, networking, all this stuff. I'm also on the select board in Berlin. I've been there for a bit. Before I came to Vermont, I spent about 10 years in information technology and security, working for all sorts of different size organizations, doing all sorts of different things. So what I'm proposing is actually something that's not terribly different from something that Montpelier is already involved in. So there's a group called EC Fiber, which operates primarily to the south of us, down from about Brookfield all the way down to West Windsor. But it's this thing called the Communications Union District, which is something like a water district or a school district, but it's an internet district. And arguably, EC Fiber will at some point be building out Montpelier with high-speed fiber to the home. But we are essentially looking to clone what they're doing to the south of us here in central Vermont. And I'll show you the list of towns that have this on the ballot already in just a bit. But just to make sure you have the whole picture for people who aren't familiar with this, we're looking at creating this municipal entity. And this is a municipal entity that's separate from Montpelier. It doesn't have the same budget. It can't take tax money from any of the towns. And Montpelier would be insulated from liability on any of the building, any of the construction that would happen. So it turns out that the Vermont's telecommunications plan says that by the end of 2020, that half of addresses in Vermont, more than half of addresses in Vermont, should have 100 megabits per second symmetric, which means stuff that you download from the internet, you should get 100 megabits per second. Stuff that you send to the internet, that should happen at 100 megs per second. According to the statistics that I have from the state, there are 0 addresses in Montpelier that have this. Of all of the towns that I've talked to in central Vermont, there are 0 that meet this requirement. And then it says by 2024, every address should meet this. And we're not really on track to hit this. I think we have something like 13%. It's in the teens % of addresses in Vermont that actually hit this. And the reason that we're at that number is because of Burlington and a couple other towns, mostly EC fiber towns to the south. So I'm looking at building this municipality with Montpelier's help and all the other communities that I'm working with to essentially build fiber to the home, connecting homes with up to gigabit fiber connections. So this is a picture of Montpelier, and you see, so all the green dots, which kind of get mashed together downtown, all the green dots are addresses, E911 addresses. All of the red lines are roads that have at least cable infrastructure coverage. Montpelier has cable basically everywhere. So almost every address in Montpelier, you have a choice between cable or DSL. The surrounding communities, including Berlin, where my house is, and I don't live very far away from here. I'm just off the map near Berlin Pond. I have DSL at best. So I could go to wireless broadband, I could go to satellite, but those aren't really options if I want to do real work from home. So what I'm asking of Montpelier is for Montpelier to help us create this district. This district doesn't exist. There's no board, there's no entity right now. So I'm asking you to add the language to your ballot that says, shall the city of Montpelier enter into this communications union district to be known as Central Vermont Internet under the provisions of 30 VSA Chapter 82 in a similar way as you did when you joined with EC Fiber. So again, member towns are insulated from the financial activities of the district. You can't use tax money. There's a hook in there that says the statute requires that each member shall make available for lease to the district one or more sites for a communications plant or components thereof within such member municipality. I think EC Fiber only does this with 3 or 4 other towns, and this is basically where they need to create sort of satellite locations, and that would not be more than, for those of you tech geeks in the crowd, 2U of rack space, or something roughly the size of your average desktop computer. Should this pass at city meeting, and we have at least 2 towns that vote affirmatively on this, the municipalities involved would appoint a CVI board member, much like you appoint an EC Fiber board member and an alternate. And that's it. Nobody votes on bonds. The bonding that happens with these districts is different. You've probably not noticed EC Fiber going out to the bond market and bringing the votes in front of Montpelier residents. It's because it's separate. It's different. So why would we do this? A lot of the existing ISPs don't really have the motivation to provide this really, truly high-speed internet. If they did, we would have seen more construction. We would have seen evidence that this is actually happening. We also get local governance. There's somebody from Montpelier who's going to be responsible for the decisions that this district makes. You get local control, local accountability, and in a lot of cases, important to some people, local tech support. There'll be somebody in central Vermont answering the phone to fix problems when it comes up. I had the opportunity to go visit EC Fiber's office, their location. and get a sense of what's going on with them. And they've been extremely helpful and very willing to help us, help CVI get off the ground and make this happen. So it's a pretty lean but really effective operation that they have going on down there. So because there's no profit motive and because this district can tap into the municipal bond market, we can offer cheaper rates than we might see than if I was coming to you and saying I'm starting my own for-profit fiber optic internet service provider. We're also, I'm hoping, if I have any say about it, we will have net neutrality written into statement of principles from the get-go. There's not going to be any negotiating or arguing or worrying what the federal government does or whether the state can say anything about that. We start square one, no filtering based on content, no throttling. The FCC has also made moves recently to give ISPs the ability to track and resell subscriber network activity, which to me as a privacy advocate is really gross. And I won't bother pitching to you why this is important for economic development, but it could also have the side effect of also indirectly driving prices of the other offerings down and the speeds up. All right, so I'm talking to you tonight. You're up at the top there. I'm talking to Berry City, whom I talked to. I pitched this to them already back in November-ish. But already on the town meeting ballot, Berrytown, Berlin, Calais, East Montpelier, Marshfield, Middlesex, Northfield, Plainfield, Roxbury, Williamstown, and Worcester. So I want to point out something that didn't occur to me until recently. Roxbury. If you have students going to from Roxbury going to Montpelier High School and they have homework assignments that require use of the internet, Roxbury is at 0% coverage with cable modems. They will have DSL at best, which means maybe 1 megabit connections. If they're in better places, closer to one of the state highways, they might get 8, they might get 10 megabits per second. Okay. So some of the criticisms that we see is I don't want my taxes to go up for something I don't want. This is like the sewer. You don't pay if you're not on the sewer line. You don't pay for the sewer. This is the same thing. Taxes in statute. It says you can't use tax money, tax capacity, to pay for this district. I don't want to be in the same position as Burlington Telecom. Burlington Telecom is a weird and unfortunate situation, and this is a different structure that insulates Montpelier from having late night meetings to midnight over and over and over again. I've been to my share of long select board meetings, and I am not interested in inflicting that on anyone. And having a bunch of these providers failed, sure. Just like any other business, any other thing, any other effort could fail. That's absolutely true that it has happened and could happen, and it's possible that this won't work. I'm going to be completely straight. But if EC Fiber is any indication, after 3 years of operation as a communications union district, they're cash flow positive after 3 years, and they're still building out more towns. They're building out all of Brookfield. Brookfield is not very dense. They're building out all of Brookfield with gigabit speed fiber to every house. If there's truly the demand, wouldn't the market correct to provide the supply? Maybe, but again, we're not seeing that. There hasn't been much new construction in Berlin or Northfield. Those are the communities I'm most familiar with working in Northfield. Aren't the towns covered by satellite and wireless broadband already? Sure, but those are, and I'm happy to go into the reasons why that's not a legitimate criticism of. It's essentially because the way people use the internet, when it requires a lot of bandwidth, these solutions are not going to be satisfactory, essentially. There's no guarantee they'll actually provide cheaper service or faster speeds. I can guarantee that there's going to be faster speeds. I mean, this is fiber optic to your house. We're talking about 700 megabits per second. EC Fiber charges $150 a month for. Will it actually be cheaper? Don't know. We haven't written the business plan or gone to the bond market yet.
Do you know if EC Fiber prices?
Yep. So $66 a month is what they charge for 17 megabits per second up and down. It's actually the next bit in your packet right below this presentation. So yeah, so my agenda was to finish up getting the language on the town meeting ballot in the more than 10 towns, and then go to public outreach and awareness building, so getting people to know, what's all this kind of legalese stuff that's on the ballot that's talking about this communications union district. Talk to more people, put this out there. Hopefully win approval at town meeting, appointing representatives to the board, and then kind of as we go, looking for, organizations and people who are interested in providing seed money or otherwise being like anchor institutions. First annual meeting in May, possibly add other municipal members, and then we start talking about feasibility studies, looking for where we're going to start, draft a business plan, a budget, initial coverage. And because this question keeps coming up over and over, I'm knocking on doors in Northfield, and they're saying, so when am I actually going to have possibilities of fast internet? I was like, if we were coming here, I couldn't imagine the first construction happening before 2020, just in terms of getting the organizational structure complete, getting the money, and actually permitting and construction and all that stuff. So there's that language for the ballot again. And there's me. And I'll shut up now.
All right, thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks.
Any questions for Jeremy? Comments? Ann?
No question necessarily, but just a comment that if the municipality is responsible for paving roads in our city, basically what we're talking about here is effectively kind of analogous. It is the roads of sort of modern culture. So, and while this isn't strictly a utility, it's participating as a member of sort of a joint utility, and I think the risks are minimal to the city, and I'm really excited to move forward with this.
Other questions?
I really appreciated your having the EC fiber rates here just below the presentation. And I noticed that while it may be more bandwidth, the prices were quite a bit higher than what I'm paying from Fairpoint right now, or Consolidated Communications. Would joining this collective in any way restrict for-profit companies from offering their products in Montpelier?
Nope, just be another option.
Thank you.
I realize this entity doesn't exist yet since we're waiting for town meeting day, but I would encourage you to explore what a potential co-op might look like going forward if this entity is approved, sort of seeing what that might look like as we move forward, depending on how many towns or where those towns are that agree to it. I think it makes sense. I moved up here from Boston, and the internet speeds are, it's like unacceptable. So I applaud your work on this, and I hope that it does well on ballots.
I'd make a motion that we put this item on the ballot. Would you like me to read it word for word, John Odom?
I would rather you sent it to me.
It's right here on the agenda format.
Okay.
Shall the
Then
city,
I can go and copy it from there.
City of Montpelier enter into
Do you
communication
want me just
union
to email it to you, John?
district to be known as Central Vermont Internet under the provision of 30 VSA, Chapter 82.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, everybody. Do you want this back, though?
Oh, thanks. Oh, you can just leave it. I'm not going to be using it again, so thanks. No, it's an additional.
Thank you.
Got to approve the warning now.
Okay, so next item is item 12, warning the public hearing.
Right, so basically,
I'm sorry, what?
it's the warning public hearing.
The warning public hearing.
So I already went through the ballot items that didn't include this item you've just added, so that would be a new item, and the number that on your draft warning for the budget, the city budget would go up by $9,500. So those are the two changes you'd make before you approve the final warning.
So we need to have a public hearing on the warning. Okay, so do we have any comments on the warning? All right, if not, we will then go to item 13. The question is to approve the warning. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
With those
Second.
two changes.
Second.
Two changes being adding the CVI
Yes.
and the $9,500 in the budget.
Seconds. Any discussion?
Just as a note, I'm recusing myself from just the school portion of that.
And likewise.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Done. So we have a
So
ballot.
we have completed our work on the budget, and we did make an earlier adjustment to the agenda to move up the discussion about the sprinkler ordinance, so we'll take that up now. So I guess we'll turn it over to the sprinkler committee to explain this.
Since I didn't have a version of this with the additional ready for you all to sign, I'm going to run and make one.
I think we'll be doing this for a little while.
Just a process question
Yeah.
too, in terms of the ballot that we just approved. Since I had pulled the bond decision from the consent agenda, and it does appear on the ballot, assuming that it is approved by the council, are we not going to have that discussion, or?
No, we are going to have the
Proceed.
discussion. I just hadn't thought about that in the context of the budget, so
Sure.
we should probably go ahead and do that.
We do need to approve necessity resolutions before we vote on them, certainly.
Just wanted to get clarity as to how best to proceed here.
Well, are those part of the budget, the necessity resolutions?
We're on the consent agenda. He
I know,
pulled-
but are they part, they're not part of the, are they part of the budget?
They're-
just approved?
Well, they're related to the bond votes. The bond votes are on the ballot that you just approved. So we should.
I guess it's up to you. I mean, I
If
think
these
we can
don't
do it
pass,
later,
we
we
can't
can-
go ahead with the bonds. So.
That's up to you.
Well, we had already made 2 amendments for the $9,500 in EC Fiber. Since this item hadn't been discussed, should we have that discussion before we approve the ballot because it's on there?
Which one? The necessity?
The 2 bonds that are being proposed to put before voters.
Okay, so why don't we take those up right now? Do you want to relay your
Sure.
concerns about that?
You know, we spent quite a bit of time talking about less than $10,000 to the community fund earlier tonight, and it did come to my attention that there were 2 fairly large bonds that are being put before voters, together totaling about $2.6 million, which is only about $325 per person divided by 8,000, so it's not a huge amount of money. Part of the reason I pulled it from the consent agenda is we have recently been informed of a number of different changes in pricing on projects, starting with our Northfield Street construction project, where we bonded over $1 million specific to road work there, a $400,000 increase to our bike paths. Recently, we got some new information about our wastewater recovery plant that was several $1 million off from initial estimates, and some of that has to do with the scope of the work and when we're doing it, but even not including methane digestion, it was significantly different by many magnitudes of previous information that had been discussed in the capital improvements projects and also included in the water and sewer plan that we approved in the summer of 2016. So my reason in raising this is we have an established process, a plan to bond, and I wanted to get some more information from the city manager because in looking at least, I certainly could be an oversight on my part, but in the documentation that I have coming out of the CIP committee or on that water sewer plan, bonding is identified on there, and perhaps it's a different kind of bonding, but I just wanted to be sure that if it is for the sorts of things that we propose bonding within these committees, that we're acknowledging that we're making significant multi-million-dollar departures from the plan that we have been talking about quite recently. So I guess I'm looking for a little more information as if these bonds are separate from the ones that would be within the scope and are identified within the CIP and the water sewer rates process.
So I thought I'd explain all that when we presented the budget. This isn't new. These aren't new presentations. The water and sewer bonds are specifically the bonds that are called for in the master plan. It calls for bond work for replacing, so these are specifically for upgrading water and sewer lines. So there was there's so much set aside per year, but we had agreed we thought we would be funding them in increments with bonding. So this is exactly what was planned on. And the general fund bond, as you recall, in the budget presentation, so some of that was for to accelerate. We talked specifically in the CIP committee about accelerating sidewalk work and other work to try to get ahead of the curve, and then we built in the bike path funding, and it came with the recommendation that next year we'd add another $50,000 to the capital plan above where we'd been to accommodate that, and recognizing that was going to require an additional.
I guess I'm a little confused then, because in reviewing at least the documents that I have from the water and sewer master plan, it appeared as though there was bonding scheduled in 2018 and then not again until about 2023 for $450,000. And so we are talking about FY19 now, aren't we?
This is 2018. We didn't, right. I don't know if Tom's here. We talked about it's specifically to fund the water and sewer infrastructure that we had planned to fund. This is.
But we bonded that last year as well, right? Included in the Northfield
part
project?
Of the Northfield Street project, that's correct. And this was to basically take the annual funding that we were going to put in and pay for it now so we can get the streets done before the next hit.
Also, in the CIP plan that I was looking at, it is, recently, even over the last 6 months, I remember asking repeatedly, do we need to readjust our bonding plan based on, adding this additional revenue or based on need of our infrastructure? And understand, you're talking to a guy who loves to spend money on infrastructure here. What I'm concerned about is the process that we use to do that, and also to make sure that it's consistent with some of the work that is being done in committee. Not that we shouldn't spend this money this year. I guess I'm making this point so that council is fully aware that we seem to be building a fairly consistent track record of adding additional bonding, as far as I can tell. And I'm happy to sit down and look more at some of the documents that are coming out of these groups to meet need. But my concern is that one of three things appears to be happening here. I'm going to say this quite plainly. Either we need to improve the way that we're anticipating need. If we thought $3 million would be enough to fix the wastewater plant, and it turns out it's $9 million, we need to sharpen our pencils and take a little closer look at that. Or prices for this sort of work are increasing dramatically, much, much faster than inflation, if they're going up by this much. Or we are aware of the risk, but we're not fully communicating that back out. And so I just want to raise those three things, because if we continue to bonding is borrowing, it's running up like at home if you use your credit card. There is a credit limit that this council or previous councils have established in terms of our bonding ceiling. And so if we approve these bonds for the ballot, and if voters approve this money, that will then constrain future councils' ability to bond within that established policy. So for things like the methane digester, there will be $2 million less before you hit that ceiling, and you'll either have to raise it and create a new policy or stay within our established policy. So that's really my intent in raising this, to acknowledge that.
Well, I'd just say, first of all, we did talk about all of these in the capital improvements process, and these were laid on the table in December. We've had several meetings and public hearings to discuss this. This is the first time this question's been raised, so it's a little bit, that seems a lot to me. And I think the three versions that you've had are pretty simplistic, nuance. I mean, the wastewater plant, there's a whole lot more that goes to that. We have anticipated these needs. We've laid out the streets. These are clearly streets that need it. They're intended to match with one of the main concerns with the CIP plan was to make sure we were combining water and sewer work with paving work so that we weren't digging up. So that is exactly how this is laid out to accommodate that. We have certainly looked at our bonding limits. I'm comfortable recommending these. And as I said, I believe we'd explained all this when we laid it out. So I don't know what else I can add that will help you feel any better.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve these two items from our consent agenda? Unless there are I assume no further comments on this.
I'll make a motion
Is there
to
a second?
include these two bondings.
Yeah, so to be clear, what you're approving here is necessity resolutions, which, I mean, essentially they're financial documents. They're not actually committing you to do the money. It just means basically we're saying it's a resolution that we don't have the money on hand to pay, that we need to finance this. It doesn't commit you to actually doing it, but these have to be done and so that we can go to the bond market.
So the motion should say that approve the 2 resolutions?
Correct.
To
Just
support the
items B
bonding?
and C on our consent agenda.
Yes.
Okay, was there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
I would just add that I would be happy to put these before voters. Ultimately, they will have the decision as to whether they want to borrow this money. If they appeared on the most recent versions of the documents that lay out the plan for this sort of spending.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so we will go to item 16, the sprinkler ordinance discussion.
All right. So the Sprinkler Ordinance Committee was appointed by this council and has met 5 times since October. It was made up of myself, Councilor Watson, and Councilor Olson. And we spent, some time learning about what the state law requirements are for sprinklers, what the current city ordinance does, and then we spent some time examining the various variances that had been granted by the so-called Sprinkler Variance Committee. It's technically the Board of Building Code Appeals or something like that in the ordinance, but we call it the Variance Committee. So we spent some time looking at, I think, at least 13 variances that had been granted since 2013 to see, what was happening there. We considered some options, and I laid all of those out for you in a memo, and I've detailed our proposal and our rationale behind that. I will say that I believe that the current ordinance is deeply flawed, and we've presented one option that I think improves it. If this council decides not to go with that option, then I think that we would be best served by repealing the current ordinance rather than leaving the current ordinance in place. I think that the option that we have presented is more nuanced, it's balanced, provides that essential public protection, along with giving folks some more freedom and giving people a clear path to request a variance, and giving the variance committee clear abilities and authority to grant that variance. So I'm happy with the proposal after the deliberation and the thought that we put into it. But this is an area where reasonable people can disagree, and it is really a public policy decision of how far we want our local government to go in, prescribing what goes into folks' homes. And I understand there's some particular strong public feeling that has been expressed to us in some written comments, and I assume will be expressed tonight regarding where folks feel that should fall, and that is absolutely welcome, and I want us to have an open discussion about that. I do want to address one thing. It's generally the practice of this council to not acknowledge or address personal attacks that are made on us. However, I feel in this instance that I would like to call this out and acknowledge this. There's been, by one member of the public, an implication made that Anne and I are somehow naive young women who were, bullied into our decision by the fire chief, and that we were somehow tricked by the fire chief. Because we are not smart enough to understand or know what's going on here. And I want to call that out as absolutely absurd. We are both intelligent members of this community who have been elected to give our best judgment here. So I absolutely want to have a discussion about the merits of this public policy. But I think that sort of insidious thinking and gossiping and sending out that sort of thinking is really poisonous, and I think the only way to address it is to call it out. So that's what I'm doing, and then I would invite us to have a real conversation about what we want our public policy on this issue to be. Thank you, Rizzi.
Okay, so I guess I just want to ask maybe Chief Gowans. I know we're going to hear a lot of comment. I think a lot of this is going to be focused on the inclusion of single and 2-unit homes. And I understand we are the only city in the state that has that requirement. So I think, at least from my view, it would be helpful to hear from you what the rationale is for having that obligation on these single and two-family homes in light of the fact that nobody else in Vermont does that.
All right, and it was established in 2003. There was a committee made up, appointed by the council. A lot of effort and work went into that. I was not on that committee. And a decision was made after looking at safety issues and in homes, single-family and two-family homes that have sprinkler systems. There's an 80% reduction in fire deaths. In homes that have sprinklers, there's a 65% reduction in firefighter injuries. In homes that have sprinkler systems, there's a 70% reduction in damage to the home. So there was a lot of thought and effort went into putting this ordinance in place based on a lot of those issues. There was a discussion on if the city were to continue to grow, the city could grow without the fire department growing. The fire department could stay at the size and equipment level they are without, so the city could continue to grow without a growth in the fire department. I wasn't involved in that committee.
I think, I was probably more involved in it than Bob was at the time. Chief Lewis was here. The city council, as I recall, unanimously approved it at the end of the process. There had been a residential fire death in the late 90s, and then there was the downtown fire shortly after that, the early 2000s, and I think that really prompted a need that something needed to be done. The city looked at this and looked at basically safety factors and looked at, I think there was a real concern with apartments because of a person could be using risky behavior in one part of the unit and the other people are vulnerable without knowing what's going on, whereas if you're building a new addition, that you can protect that. I think, so that was also the reason why the tax credit was created, to recognize that there was a lessened burden on the fire department for those community, those people that had those, that they could receive a capped tax credit. And in fact, the city also got very actively involved. For a time, there were grants for these sorts of things. There aren't anymore, in helping some of the downtown commercial buildings to obtain sprinkler systems to prevent a catastrophic loss in the downtown, but also loss of life. I think a compelling factor was, and even since this ordinance has been another one, was that the only fatalities in Montpelier, fire fatalities in the last 40 years, had been in single-family residential homes, or one or two families residentials, not in commercials, not in apartment buildings.
I guess my question about that, though, is this ordinance wouldn't affect that.
The existing ones, no, that's right.
That's what I mean,
Not
so this
existing, but
ordinance wouldn't have any impact on these.
No.
And aren't newer units, are they, like, for example, required to have wired-in
I can tell you.
wired-in smoke detectors? It just seems to me new units, the only units, there's an anomaly in this, it seems to me, that you've got older units that are going to be less safe and unaffected by the ordinance, and new units that are going to be more safely built that have, for example, wired-in smoke detectors that would be affected. So
not
I guess
necessarily.
that's what I'm trying to understand.
Not necessarily, because newer construction is of a lightweight construction. It burns quicker, collapses sooner. I got all that information out to the council from the NFPA. In addition to that, it's more the furnishings. Furnishings of a home are made of a lot of polycarbonates. Things burn more rapidly, flashovers happen more quickly, temperatures rise quicker in homes now than they did 20 years ago, and because of what furnishings are made of.
Yeah, I think, and at the time the ordinance was put in, council certainly recognized that the cost and the effort involved in retrofitting every home in Montpelier was, not at all feasible or anything you could even consider, but that, if going forward we could protect the community and people, that was, I think, the intended desire. We did take a look at the time, and again, so at the outset, I'd say if we're going to seriously consider relooking at this, I would ask that we've had a committee look at it and reach a conclusion that we spend some time, because a lot of work was done by the council, getting a lot of information. We looked at videos of fires with sprinklers and without them, and even in smoke alarms, you still have to be able to get out. I mean, you're still, that's not if you're upstairs and there's the gases and those kind of things. And just because you know the alarm's going off doesn't mean that you're going to escape successfully. So that, you know, yes, it's better than having no smoke alarm, but it's not as safe as a sprinkler. And so I think, you know, I just urge that you've had my suggestion. You've had a committee that put a lot of work in it, gave you a recommendation that our chief and I will fully support. And
Well, I appreciate
Just to
all the
follow up
work.
on
I
the
just,
smoke- the smoke alarm, because I've heard that smoke alarms are better. The NFPA's reports will tell you that on smoke alarms in a single-family or multifamily home will reduce fire deaths by 50%, where sprinkler systems would reduce deaths by 80%.
yeah, and I wasn't suggesting they're better, and but I guess my concern, I understand all the work that's gone into it. I'm not saying we're going to, you know, make a dramatic decision here, but I'm just look at this and say we are the only city in Montpelier. If we were facing this dire public health threat, we would not be the only community in the state that had this ordinance, and that's kind of the lens that I see this. But
Well, and so a couple of things. I read Barbara's response as well, and I'd actually kind of be interested in having her come up as well, since she sort of advocated for a different position than the committee did, and I would like to hear that perspective, because I've heard from a number of folks who are architects and who are contractors who are involved in potential new projects, and I think that's a really important perspective to hear, and I understand how much work the city has put into this, but I think it's important that we have a robust discussion given what's at stake here. So I would like to invite Barbara up.
Sure. So we have a number of members of the public. I know the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission considered this, and so would like. I know there are a lot of people here from the public, so including Barbara and Kirby. So however you guys want to proceed, but we're interested in hearing from anybody who's here wants to comment on this issue.
Kirby Keaton, I'm the Vice Chair of the Planning Commission. So Barb has a lot to say, as Commissioner Hill, or Councilor Hill, pointed out. But first, I thought we'd just kind of set the stage with where I could catch you up on the motion that was passed by the Planning Commission, so the Planning Commission's official response to the committee's work. And I should start off by saying that it seems like it was a lot of great work, and that Rosie's memo was wonderful and really well thought out and put together. But officially, the Planning Commission responded to this with just a motion to suggest that you repeal the ordinance instead of trying to amend it, and for one simple reason, and that being that the Planning Commission has tried to put forward one set of rules whenever possible. That's kind of what the Planning Commission has been trying to do in its recent work with the zoning and other things we've looked at. And currently, there's a state building code, and the state building code was passed by the legislature, where it was decided that single family and these duplexes were going to be left out. And so we'd like for that one set of rules to apply to Montpelier, and as the mayor pointed out, that's what every other town has decided to do. So that was kind of the limits of what the Planning Commission vote was about. It was just about having one set of rules. And then I also have a personal statement about things, but at this point I could probably hand it off to Barb now that, and then I can.
Whichever. Now, or if
okay.
you want to go
well,
ahead.
maybe okay. So
as long as you're here, maybe go ahead.
For efficiency's sake, I'll just say that, and I could. So what I have to say, I could say any week. I think any given week at these meetings, something comes up that is an obstacle to housing in Montpelier, and we have a real problem with a shortage of housing in Montpelier, and I think that every week it seems like something comes up that that could be an obstacle to doing something about that problem. And the market shows us that there's an incredible demand for housing in Montpelier, and there's almost no supply. And economics tells us that doesn't happen unless we put up some really serious barriers to having the market respond. And since the market's not responding, I think we see that it's been, the city has done something there. And I think there's dozens of roadblocks, and that this ordinance is one of those things that gets in the way of housing. I don't need to tell you all of the things we're missing out on because we have this housing problem. If we solve the housing problem, we would have fewer reliance on automobiles. We would have less forest fragmentation elsewhere in the region. Our property taxes would be lower, the economic advantages, et cetera, et cetera. I think you all know all about all those things. So to me, it's not just housing. It's not just a one-issue thing. It's a holistic, big issue thing. And one thing I'd like to get across, and hopefully I won't be coming back and doing a speech like this again, so hopefully it's just a one-time thing for many, many, many different things, sprinklers and many things, and it's that we have to say no to these barriers to housing more often, much more often than we say yes, if we're actually going to be serious and do something about the housing problem. And that's my own personal statement. The Planning Commission did not have anything to do with that.
Okay. Well said. Thank you, Kirby. Thanks. Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Hill. I have copies of what I sent to the council. If you don't
the microphone.
have it. I realize it was late in the afternoon today.
I got it.
You got it?
I got it as well, actually. Yes, I got a copy as well.
Sure.
I'll take a copy short. Thank you.
Chief Gowans.
Oh, look, yeah, I've
Yes.
seen it.
Yeah, this is kind of a modification of what we've talked about in the past. First of all, I really want to commend the committee. I attended as many of the meetings as I could, and there was a lot of work and a lot of good thought that went into that whole thing. And but particularly commending emergency services. I mean, the fact that we have so few fires in Montpelier is really direct result of our excellent services here. So I don't want this to be reflective of that at all. I do want to address a few of the issues that were raised in Councilor Kruger's memo that, well, some of them surprised me a bit. She mentioned that 3 different options were considered. One, to repeal the ordinance completely. The second was to create a fire protection district in the downtown core. And that has been discussed in the past, and it wasn't clear to me why that was not pursued, because if our concern is really about fire protection for the downtown district, that would create the opportunity to, in some cases, perhaps put some additional requirements in for commercial buildings in the downtown. And then the third option was to keep the ordinance but exempt 1- and 2-family homes. The discussion about foam furnishings is certainly an issue, but I think that would, as Mayor Haller pointed out, that happens in existing homes too. And so I don't think that by adding sprinklers to new construction, which admittedly is going to be a very small percentage of the homes that are occupied in Montpelier are going to be new construction. But I just wonder if we're asking the right questions. Are we looking at the right threats and dangers to the city? I was sort of disappointed to see in the budget that there was a line item for rental inspections, but that it wasn't funded, because I can certainly see that if we had the opportunity to have existing rental units inspected, to my mind, that's where a lot of the potential fire problems occur. I also think, as we went through this, I had some different interpretation about the codes regarding change of use, but I won't get into that right now. It's something more that should maybe be discussed with building code officials to see where's the clarity here. Certainly, some of the requirements I applaud for exempting duplexes or accessory units. That makes it very clear for us to be able to implement the zoning attempt to create more housing by allowing people in large houses to duplex. That's definitely a benefit. But the other thing that became clear to me as I attended the committee meetings and also in looking at this later was that if we modify state codes without a clear knowledge of what we're doing, we potentially get the city into a very serious situation. In the current current ordinance is fairly narrowly written, so perhaps it hasn't created any consequences yet. But I think that the possibility of creating unintended consequences when we take a national code and that the state has adopted, a number of national codes that the state has adopted, and tweak them without necessarily knowing how that impacts other aspects of the code, I think can be a problem. For example, one of the things I was kind of horrified to discover in one of the national codes is that if we sprinkler 1 and 2 family homes, then we are not required to put in egress windows in bedrooms any longer.
Well, I think that's a little bit confusing because Montpelier has adopted the 2003 IRC, and so we have a building code that requires that, and it wouldn't allow for there to be that exemption if it's sprinklered. So
no, it's in one of the other codes. It's in NFPA 101. In the section of NFPA 101 that addresses 1 and 2 family homes, when it says if it's sprinklered, then it's not required.
Right. We also have IRC, the 2003 IRC, and so that there's another piece of city ordinance that is requiring.
Well,
and that's what the Chris Lumber, our building inspector, when he reviews those, he looks at all of the, and I think that's addressed early on in the.
I just think that it's it can create a lot of unintended consequences when we sort of pick and choose what we, if we wanted to do this, what my recommendation was to the city council was to suspend the current sprinkler ordinance and to sit down with code officials, people who from the state and, if necessary, federal people who are involved in writing the codes, and so that we know exactly what the ramifications are of any of these actions that we take. And we may still decide to take them. I would hope not in terms of 1 and 2 family homes, but at least, in terms of your other concerns about change of use, those are happening in our city, and maybe we need to be able to clarify that. But to just do that without looking at it more comprehensively is disturbing to me.
Just want to make one clarification there. We are not changing the state code. We are applying additional requirements on top of the state code. So we're not going in and editing the state code. This is in addition to what's in the state code.
But you're modifying the state code as it's been adopted by the state fire.
We're being more restrictive, yes.
Well, but that is modifying it because you're adding requirements to it that statewide are not there.
But isn't that true in the zoning ordinance too? Aren't there occasions when we were stricter, say on, we talked about the vernal pools and other areas that exceeded state law that were unique to Montpelier and not consistent? I mean, isn't that something that communities do?
I think that was, are you still, yeah. I think that was what Kirby was addressing, is that we pulled back from adding any additional requirements that were Montpelier only.
There's nothing in the new zoning that's different from state?
That exceeds the state requirements.
I think your point is correct. That there are things in the zoning that's unique to Montpelier, but we're trying to, in places where there's already a code on a subject, the planning commission is trying to keep it so that there's one set of rules to make it simpler.
Yeah, I'm not trying to catch anybody. I seem to recall there were places where the state set a limit and we adopted stricter standards.
I think Kirby's point is there's a code, there's a building code that is.
Can I just make a point on that? The state is very supportive of our ordinance. And we have a contract with the state. The state has signed a contract with the city of Montpelier to do inspections, and they're very supportive of our ordinance.
Okay, thank you. You want to hear? Okay, Ben, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Ben Eastwood, Main Street. I just want to say, as a citizen here in town, I'm appalled to hear people putting more development or cheaper development ahead of safety of firefighters and of people. The numbers are clear. I'm a former EMT. When I used to run with Brandon, Vermont. I've responded as an EMT to fire calls, and I've seen what happens, and I've treated firefighters who were injured on a scene, and the fact that we're putting easy development ahead of public safety and ahead of firefighter safety is appalling to me. I think that we need to set a strong safety standard for our city, and furthermore, Mr. Mayor, you seem opposed to this idea in your speaking, but you are you not a lobbyist for the insurance agency industry and for the real estate valuation? And aren't real estate developers financially impacted by this potential? Is there a conflict of interest in your lobbying work with your ability to participate in this conversation?
No, can't think of any client that I have that could care. I mean, has no interest at all in this.
Real
This is
Estate
really
Valuation
business.
Association doesn't care about
I don't
this?
represent them, Ben.
According to their Secretary of State's
right, no, I'm not,
website,
don't.
you do.
Right, no, I don't.
Okay. So the website, so the Secretary of State's website is
It's not
falsely...
current, that's right, not current, right.
All right, well, that's just what it says on our
Right,
website.
I understand. It's not current.
And you don't represent insurance industry at all?
I do represent insurance entities. I don't think they would have any position one way or another on this.
It seems like those things would call into play, and you also represent Fairpoint, which would be a potential opponent or competitor to the internet discussion earlier, and I was happy to see that you didn't take any position on that. But I just think that public safety and firefighter safety is something that we can't nickel and dime. This is something that has been discussed through the city council, as Bill has said here, unanimously supported this idea of improving public safety, and to see people putting further development ahead of firefighters is just appalling to me. That's all.
I'd just briefly like to respond to Mr. Eastwood's comments about safety. I don't speak for the whole council, but I don't think that anyone's debating that having sprinklers in buildings makes them more safe. I think we all agree on that. And if you look at other more stringent code, for example, in high-rise apartment buildings, open flames are prohibited. So people in cities can't have gas stoves in buildings over a certain height. There is increasing level of strictness around building code to keep people safe. We're in favor of that. What we're trying to do here tonight is to find a balance. And I respect the chief's position on this immensely. His position should always be in favor of greater public safety.
80%.
Ben, we're not gonna. I'm sorry, we're not gonna have a public debate. If you want to come back up and make a comment, you can. But we're not gonna have. You're gonna get called on like anybody else. So wait until Mr. Turcotte finishes, and then if you'd like to make a comment. But we're going to do it in order as well.
So I hope that tonight we're really thinking, as Mr. Keaton was saying, more holistically about how this particular ordinance may be affecting, from my perspective, specifically the development environment here in the city of Montpelier. We know that for a long time, even before this ordinance, the population here in Montpelier has been quite stable. We also know that there is much more demand for housing right now than there is supply. I see the changes in this revised ordinance as a step in the right direction. I also see our new zoning that we recently adopted as a big step in the right direction in terms of addressing City Council goal of providing a variety of housing. Applying this to single and two-family homes is really kind of targeting the middle class here. Subsidized housing is going to do the development and install sprinklers with taxpayer money regardless. People who have the money don't really care, 10 or 20 or 30,000, however much more they're going to spend on a sprinkler system and the maintenance and testing. There's also nothing stopping any resident from independently installing a sprinkler system in any new construction that they build. I guess I'm a little concerned about the mandate to do that and how that may be affecting the palatability of the development environment here in Montpelier. And in speaking to developers, it definitely is one of a variety of issues that are part of the reason that we are not seeing as much new construction as this council would like to see. On the flip side of this, I could acknowledge that for any existing homeowner or property owner in Montpelier, having more restrictive building code will help to maintain and increase their property value, because we know we have demand here, and that will also help the roughly 50% of residents who need to turn over their house in the next 15 years as they are changing their lifestyle as they age, to get a fair market value for that house. So that will help to keep up property prices here in Montpelier, because it's an additional cost. You can add that right onto the sale price of your home if it's a requirement of new building, because you can't go and buy that house without it. Those are my thoughts on this matter.
Okay, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I just want to again say 80%. And the fact is that the reduction in the potential for death and serious injury, the reduction of property damage, will actually have another consequence of reducing insurance costs. You know, this is something, you know, this is not necessarily something that is going to be an enormous burden. It's going to affect new housing, to bring new housing up into the 21st century. I can't understand why we're so afraid to take the lead in this town. Why do we have to wait for everybody else to do it before we finally take a proactive approach to something as important as safety? The safety of our firefighters, the safety of our kids, and families in this town. And you know, I'm just, quite frankly, I'm appalled. Thank you.
Jim.
Good evening, Jim Libby. I live on Liberty Street, and first thing I want to say is I'm the person that had the conversation with Councilor Kruger that she characterized pretty well. I've had to do this a couple times in my professional career, and it's not pleasant. And I've already apologized to Councilor Watson, although the entity in her house that had to deal with my I told her I was using my outside voice, but it was her answering machine, so that wasn't as difficult or disrespectful, I think, to the conversation that Rosie and I had. So, you know, all that I can say is I apologize to the council for that. I got on this very inappropriate line of argument, and I can certainly, you know, what Rosie said is an accurate interpretation of what I said. And what I realized after I had those conversations was that it was inappropriate. It was inaccurate. I had no reason. There was no basis in fact for me to think what Rosie heard from me, and I said it. You know, I'm not denying that. And so what happened between yesterday and today, and Councilor Hill may have seen an earlier draft of my comments, and so my comments between yesterday and today sort of went around 180 degrees, because once I got off that sort of disrespectful, conspiratorial, you can, I don't know, attach any name that fits. It wasn't appropriate. You know, I quickly realized early this morning, and then had some feedback from Jack McCullough and Polly Nickel, who I rely on a lot, and I should have listened to them before I had the conversation with Rosie. But so, you know, Councilor Kruger and I will have to figure out how we repair whatever damage has been done. I hope that I can help do that. So let me just say three things. So I'm pretty happy with the comments that I submitted today. And there was a lot of input from Jack McCullough and Polly, although the Housing Task Force didn't have an opportunity to talk about it. So those are really my comments. What I was trying to say about the process is that it looked to me as if neither the council nor the committee had a real opportunity to step back and ask the big question. You know, should we have this ordinance? And I thought I suspected that might have been lacking in the committee process, because it's appropriately dominated by the fire safety conversations that the chief and the building inspector brought to it. And I really appreciated the memo that Rosie put together. It contained a lot of good information and good thought. You know, generally, I think that the best way to do this, and I think other states have done it this way, I can't tell you how many, is that the state one way or another, passes a law that expressly enables municipalities or counties to do this. I suspect that it may be accompanied by general fund revenue or bonds or however things are funded in other states, because this is one of those unfunded mandates that all of us once in a while have had a problem with, and I think that's not that's a problem, and I think it's a problem particularly in the housing area, particularly because the city, I think, can and should be more welcoming to builders, and the city can be very proud of the track record that we've done over the last 20 years, and supporting all these very important projects. I think we have the great track record with the Housing Trust Fund. I think it's important to, from time to time, and now is a good time, assess the effectiveness of how trust fund monies have been used, and I think the Housing Task Force is, intending to do that. Let me see if there's, I pretty much covered the bases in my written comments. Let's see if there's anything I'd like to add. The final point is, I think, I sense, and this is appropriate, I sense two things. One, the council is usually quite deferential to its professionals, including its fire prevention professionals. And I have no comment on our fire prevention professionals, and I actually have no comment on the effectiveness of this ordinance or amended orders on improving fire protection. It will. Whatever you do, it's going to get better, if only in one or two or three houses. So I was encouraging, I didn't do this well yesterday, maybe I did a little better today, encouraging you all to have that conversation, which is stepping back. The other thing that I sense is that it's local officials, and I know you guys better than anybody else. I don't know you personally, but I know your predecessors, and Bill's been around forever too, so he's a familiar face. But there is a reluctance to repeal things. It's as if there has to be, some huge cataclysmic event. Instead of what you might consider is to say, this wasn't a good idea. If it was a good idea, it isn't working out real well. And, I had mixed feelings. I was really appreciative of Rosie describing the variance process. That's not something to be proud of. In some places, people would be fired for that disregard of the law. I don't think people were harmed. That's the good thing. And so in addition to the other issues that have been mentioned, I think there's a time when you just say, we tried this, when it was Mary Hooper and the former fire chief, maybe been the same building inspector, I wasn't directly involved. Those people were very committed to fire safety. Mary was the former commissioner of the Department of Labor and Industry, and I think she was instrumental in getting the state code to cover multifamily buildings. I'm not sure of that. I don't know that, but I know she was very committed to it, and she would have been very committed to this ordinance. She was, and the council adopted it. I just think it didn't work out as planned, and it's unfair. It does provide additional fire safety in the small number of units that are newly constructed, but I'm not sure that's the right place to have mandates. But the only other point I would make is that, and compare it to how the state and the municipalities have handled affordable housing. In the 80s, there's a tremendous leap forward on affordable housing. It's been a huge problem. With one part of it was the creation of the Housing and Conservation Board. At the same time, the legislature created a dedicated fund. In the second year of its existence, appropriated an additional $20 million in addition to the dedicated fund, and has since 1988 appropriated between 10 and 20 million annually. And then last year there was a $35 million state housing bond. So that's a situation where the legislature said, we want affordable housing. We want it to be delivered by a nonprofit delivery system, and here's how we're going to help you. And you see the accomplishments. And that's not a feature of this ordinance. And I think it's, I think maybe it's time to start over. It isn't a stellar track record, and that is no reflection on our fire protection professionals. I don't know why the variance stuff was so screwed up. I don't know whether it was like jury nullification. John probably knows what that is. Kind of a jury really wants to reach a right result, and they don't care what the law is, and they just vote to the right result. And the lawyers and the judges are scratching their heads. I don't think there was any conscious effort, but kind of feels like that ordinance isn't working out real well if there was that much activity around variances. So I apologize again. I made some significant errors yesterday, and I'll live with that and hope we can move on. So, if you have any questions?
Thank you for your comments, Jim. Appreciate it. Okay.
One minor factual matter. Chuck Caparis was the mayor in '03 when it was passed.
Oh, he was.
No.
Yes.
Hi, Gene Troya. I'm not a Montpelier resident, but am a Montpelier taxpayer and have been for 35 years. I have probably caused more of these sprinkler systems to be installed in single-family houses than anyone else in town. I'm a local building contractor, have been for 35 years, and I almost don't know where to start. I think that the idea that houses constructed since 1982 are somehow more fire burn faster than houses built in 1850 is misguided. There are some issues with houses that have been built with plate trusses, which can, in a fire, come off and cause collapse. And I understand the fire department's reticence in the integrity of those buildings in a fire. But to have a ordinance that requires a sprinkler in a single-family house, I think is ridiculous. I have put 15,000-gallon underground storage tanks to support sprinkler systems. I have put 1,500 in-house storage tanks to support sprinkler systems in single-family residences. The cost is not. You guys just you don't understand the cost involved that you're putting on middle-class residents that you want to draw into town. If you want single-family house development, I live in East Montpelier. I'm on the select board in East Montpelier. I've been involved in town government for 30-plus years. I can build a house on County Road in Montpelier. I can go on the other side of the road in East Montpelier and build the same house for almost $30,000 less. If you're going to go and amend the ordinance and exempt 1,200 square foot houses, small houses, if you're going to exempt manufactured homes, what are you doing? You're making social choices through building ordinances. And I don't think that's quite right. I question, as the ordinance stands, what happens with manufactured homes in town now. I mean, I'm proud of what I've done in Montpelier, and I've built a significant number of the single-family houses that have happened in this town since 1982. That I know about this meeting on 2.5 hours notice from a friend of mine that I didn't know at all about the committee and had a chance to talk to the committee, I think is a miscommunication on the part of the government of the town and how people are notified of the way this happens. I think it's ridiculous that I can own a single-family house, and I own a couple of them in town that have sprinkler systems in them, and I can own a multifamily house built in 1843 or 7 or whatever it is, and not have a sprinkler system in it. I mean, you're putting the public safety issue bass backwards. That I can go into a restaurant on Main Street and be in a building without a sprinkler system, but I have to have one in a single-family house. You're putting the cart before the horse. And that's just the way I feel. I'm proud.
All right, I'm going to ask you to wrap up if you could. We got a number of other people we need to hear from. Appreciate your comments. I don't want to. I mean, feel free to finish up, but just ask you to wrap up your comments if you could.
I understand you don't want to hear about the people that actually build houses in your town.
No, I do want to hear from you, and we have, and I appreciate that. It's almost 9 o'clock, and we have a lot to go through, and more people we need to hear from. So we just don't have an unlimited amount of time. That's my only point.
Okay. My point is, if you're about public safety, look at public buildings. You're looking at single-family houses, which is a small part of the equation. If you're looking at promoting development in town and drawing middle-class people to town, look at what you're doing in cost to building single-family houses.
Thanks for your comments. Justin?
Mr. Mayor, I just have a quick follow-up question for this gentleman. As a veteran, right here, as a veteran builder and contractor, I'm curious for your professional opinion. Does having a sprinkler ordinance for single and two-family homes in Montpelier in any way change your interest or willingness to develop here in the city of Montpelier?
My interest in developing in the city of Montpelier is it's so hard to do. Your property values are like gold. It's like having a house in St. Petersburg or Provincetown, I mean. It's a niche market. The values are really high, and they will stay that way as long as you discourage development.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, having this sort of restrictive ordinance actually helps to increase in our property values?
Absolutely.
From your perspective?
From my perspective, if it costs $20,000 more to build the house in Montpelier than it does in East Montpelier or Berlin, it increases your property values. That's just my perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, other comment? Oh, yeah.
I did a little cursory research. It doesn't appear like Burlington, and I know that we're not Burlington, not saying that we are Burlington, but Burlington has been tackling the affordable housing issue for as long as we have, but I think they've been somewhat more successful. I also just took a glance to see, it looks like the Massachusetts legislature enacted a law, I want to say in the 90s, and the Mass Supreme Court took up an issue about, and it looks like the Mass law targeted 4+ unit buildings. So, I think that I've heard a lot about single family and duplex, and I'm not sure what the answer is, whether it's repealing in its entirety, which I hear some compelling arguments for, or whether it's to create a solution to these particularly articulated scenarios where a building is designated maybe as commercial retail and then transitions to a dining establishment or something along those lines. But other places don't have ordinances like this and seem to address public safety. They also seem to, affordable housing seems to also dovetail into all of this in a way that does not cost an extra $20,000+ on a single family or a 2-unit building. And I agree that that does price out a lot of folks. And I've heard from folks who have, maybe rehabbed places or who have built new construction where that was a huge expense, and that really kind of determined how many units they would build or what they would or wouldn't do. And I think as a council, it's incumbent upon us to get this right.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I'm pretty sure that most affordable housing that's built in Montpelier would already be sprinkled because of the number of units, and so it's going to trigger the state ordinance anyway. So that's one thing. Just one thing I want to make sure that people understand is that the way that this is written under the variance section, there is a provision that things that will be considered in granting variances includes unreasonable cost burden. So if that is, if it's going to cost something like $10,000 or more, I'm not sure that we can say for sure that will be granted, but that it'll be granted a waiver. But that is certainly one of the things that the variance committee can weigh. So as as people are worried about construction, I mean, this is a very different thing than what we're dealing with now. So just want to make sure that everyone is aware of that.
I would like to respond to that. It costs more than $10,000 to sprinkle a single-family house.
So I have multiple friends who have done this, and it's cost them about $10,000. They've gotten bids for more, and that's fine. But that's what we're saying, is that that the cost is a factor, and that's built into this ordinance.
Why don't you just make it for multifamily properties and exempt single-family houses, or exempt single-family houses that have more than a specific setback from their neighbor?
So the setbacks are part of this as well.
If you're 6 feet away, I can understand the fire hazard. But if you're on a 0.4 acre lot with a 20-foot setback, why does this become an issue when we all know it costs more than $10,000 to sprinkle a single-family house?
So I would encourage you to...
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here. So we're going to, at the end of the argument, you made your presentation. We appreciate that, but this isn't a forum for having an argument back and forth. Okay, Tim.
Thank you. I'm Tim Heaney. I live on Main Street, and I work on Main Street in town. I wrote up some thoughts and tried to get my mind around this today, too, and share Gene's frustration with years of trying to work with this ordinance and create housing. And so I'm not going to read all this to you, but forgive me if I read a bit, and I'm going to try to do bullets just to give you my thoughts. I think Rosie's remarks were really good, and thank you. It helped me get an understanding of what the committee's been doing. I'm just concerned that the recommendations don't improve the functionality of the ordinance that we have today, and they do not strategically encourage housing growth in line with our recently adopted zoning and master plan. The ordinance we have has proven to be ineffective. Its focus is on requiring fire suppression sprinkler systems for new structures, including single-family homes. And as it's been said tonight, I think single-family homes are probably a very small part of our housing stock, and probably the safest group of homes within the housing stock we have, with hardwired smoke and carbon monoxide systems, new wiring, new heating systems. They're actually built to code. Most of the homes we have in Montpelier, there was no building code when they were built. So I think it really is the wrong focus, as if you've heard over and over tonight. I think probably the focus really needs to be, if you want to create a safer living environment for people in Montpelier and you want to improve our older housing stock, you've got to create a way to have this sprinkler ordinance focus on existing multifamily housing. The fire within the last 2 weeks on the corner of Main and Loomis Street with an 8-unit house, I think that property could have benefited if there had been a sprinkler system there. Bob Gowans, I'm sure, can tell me more if that would have kicked in or not there. But
I would love a sprinkler system in every building in the city.
Yeah.
But there has to be, you have to draw the line somewhere.
And I agree.
Tried to do.
I'd like to see the line focus more on the older multifamilies and trying to find a way to create a code that's not punitive. You know, it's the old carrot and stick thing like the code we have. Let's create an incentive to find a way to help people install these systems and all these wonderful old buildings that we have. There are a lot of neat ways we can do it. You could even be as simple as helping to offset some of the hookup fees for the city water lines. Anyway, I think the committee's recommendation is flawed in essence because it's just trying to modify a flawed basic policy. I'd love to see the council take up the Planning Commission's recommendation and repeal the ordinance, and have the committee take a fresh look at what can we do to make housing safer in Montpelier. Hopefully that recommendation will include ways to create incentives to put sprinkler systems in our multifamily houses. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Jean.
If we're ready, I would like to make a motion.
Let me just first see if there is anybody else who would like to make a comment before we do, if you don't mind, Jean.
No.
Phil, welcome.
Good evening. I'm Phil Dodd. I primarily got interested in this from the point of view of a downsizing group I've been involved with. Some of you may be aware of that. We're looking for opportunities for people to move out of their larger homes as they get older and move into smaller ones. So this will impact that desire. You know, when I first learned about this, I was surprised to learn we're the only city in Vermont that has a sprinkler ordinance applying to single-family homes. Most of us live in town without sprinklers. You know, there is a balance here, and you guys have to figure out where that is. But one thing I thought about was we could make cars a lot safer. We could require $10,000 more in safety equipment or heavier cars and have probably a bigger impact on cutting down deaths. But as a society, we've decided not to do that, and we live with the situation we have. So there's that cost and benefit you really have to weigh here. The thing, I went to the last sprinkler ordinance meeting, and I had heard that the earlier draft before the one you ended up with excluded, it was an exemption for all single-story, single-family homes, which was appealing to me because that's what a lot of downsizers would like to have. And I think it makes some sense because you can get out the window, you can get out the door if you require enough doors and windows. But then it got pulled back to only houses less than 1,200 square feet. It also, the exemption does not apply if there's an attached garage or it doesn't apply if there's a basement. So it's really become a very limited exemption. And I think, you know, potentially I'd like to see at least to go back to the single-story exemption and, you know, maybe require a certain number of doors, one door for every 600 square feet, something like that. But you know, these costs are real, and building costs are already very high. So this is a real factor for people to consider. I'm sorry I got here a little late. I guess you may have already heard from the Planning Commission about what they were saying. I do think their views should be given some weight. I happen to have read the statute, powers and duties of the Planning Commission. Any Planning Commission created under this chapter, this is from Vermont statutes, may prepare and present to the legislative body recommended building, plumbing, fire, electrical, housing, and related codes. So they do have a role to play here, and so I'm glad they're here and getting a chance to say something. Someone told me some figures recently that I can't verify, but they said in the last 20 years, 1,200 single-family homes have been built in the U30 towns surrounding us, and 100 in Montpelier. I'm actually surprised it's that many as 100 single-family homes. But there is, you know, an issue here, and I think if we want to have more single-family homes in Montpelier, there should be some further loosening of this restriction. We made a lot of changes in the zoning recently with the idea that this would increase housing in Montpelier. You know, as I look this, I really think this sprinkler ordinance is a bigger barrier to single-family homes being built in Montpelier than the zoning ever was. So it's an important issue, and I'm sure you'll give it serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Jesse.
Brief. My name is Jesse Remick. I'm a District 2 resident here in Montpelier since 2004. I agree with a lot of what I've heard tonight, safety being an important factor as well. I work at an architecture firm, so I have the pleasure of dealing with codes quite a bit, and I do not pretend to know any and all of them, but I do spend a fair amount of time in them. I'm just getting caught up on this issue, and I feel it's a very important one. But in looking at one of the items that the committee was considering, the three options, one of them keeping the ordinance but exempt 1- and 2-family homes, one of the main reasons it seemed that that was not taken was perhaps a statement which I would like to have the answer to, is the savings that the fire department is seeing by the sprinkler ordinance. And I think it really needs to be singled out of whether that includes only the single-family ordinance or the entire ordinance together as a city. Because I'm not sure that by sprinkling single-family homes, we'd see that savings. And I feel that that is a compelling argument to not consider that. I'm not sure that that's the right argument. And regarding the IRC, without having it with me, because I never say I know anything about codes without going back and checking, I'm not sure that the IRC does require a sprinkler system.
Not the 2003 version, no.
Right. But they do require other provisions be made for safety.
Yes, you have to have interconnected smoke detectors and egress.
Means of egress, be it a door or a large enough size window. So we're in part saying we need to have a sprinkler system, and we need to do these other factors as well. So it feels like it's a belt and suspenders type system that we're requiring of single-family homes, and I'm just not sure that it's the right approach, but I respect everyone's opinion.
Thank you, Jesse. Any other comments? Yeah, briefly, Ben. Very.
Rather than a belt and suspenders, I think of it as a seat belt and airbag solution. That's all.
I just had one quick response to Mr. Rennick. Was talking about the future buildings. This won't be long. The theory didn't discriminate between which type of building, whether it was residential or commercial. It was the theory at the time was if the city continues to develop, we won't have to expand the size of the fire department because any new building will be sprinklered. So if, for example, we were successful beyond our wildest dreams with housing and we added 1,000 new units, if they were all not sprinkled, which they, realistically some of them would be, but if in theory they weren't, we would probably have to add firefighters to cover those new that new supply. So that was the theory. It didn't single out one type of building for another. Barbara.
If there's no one else, just to address a couple of things that were said. Ashley mentioned affordable housing, and I started to think about Habitat for Humanity houses, which are single-family houses, and anything that was built under that in Montpelier would require sprinklers. And the other thing, too, is just to direct the council to the research that I attached to my comments. When I started looking at this 2 years ago, and I went online, this is what popped up, and this was some extensive research done by several groups regarding the relative safety of smoke detectors and sprinklers. And what they said pretty consistently was that in many cases, fires that could still be deadly were too small or to activate the sprinklers. So the first line of defense has to be the detectors and the alarms. And so people get out of the building. Now I understand that the sprinklers are much better for saving the property and certainly better for protecting the firefighters. And I do appreciate that factor, that if you're going to go into a building, you'd much rather have a building that's more structurally sound. But in terms of protecting the occupants, it seems like it's not always the case. And I guess Yeah, I guess I will just leave it at that. I think that again, I would urge us to not write code language on our own, and that we need to be using the experts that know how to write code language if we choose to rewrite this ordinance.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara.
May I respond to some of the comments?
Sure.
First to Barbara's. I said it earlier, sprinklers reduce deaths in single-family homes by 80%. Smoke alarms and CO alarms reduce deaths in single-family homes by 50%. That's the statistics. You can review it through the NFPA. Sprinklers reduce deaths by 80%. On housing barriers, myself, Mike Miller, Chris Lumber, we're meeting all the time with builders. People coming to us, talking to us about projects. We're not hearing that the reason I'm not building in Montpelier is because of sprinkler systems. We're not hearing that. Probably 6 months ago, we met with a builder who was considering a fairly substantial project in Montpelier. And we talked to him about sprinklers, and he said, I'm not worried about sprinklers. I'm worried about the neighbors preventing me from building my project. I'm not worried about sprinklers. I'm worried about the neighbors. This is a gentleman who's interested in doing a very substantial project in Montpelier. So we're not hearing that. We're not hearing, people aren't coming to us and saying, I can't find a place to build in Montpelier. I have ideas. There was a project presented on Sibley Avenue that was prevented. That wasn't prevented by sprinkler systems. We all know what prevented that. So we're not hearing that it's being prevented. Public billings was brought up. We should be paying attention to public billings. We are paying attention to public billings. We are paying attention to our restaurants. That's on our radar. It's one of the things that the changers want to address is those areas. So we are looking at that. And then I just want to quickly, there's been a couple of comments about the variance committee. And Councilmember Turcotte was a member of the variance committee. The variance committee worked really hard, and they tried to do the right thing. It was sometimes outside of the ordinance, but it was a group of people, volunteers, who were trying really hard to do the right thing. And I don't think we should be criticizing the efforts of the variance committee. Thank you.
Rob, any other comments? Yeah, Jesse, sure. No problem.
I agree with that sentiment perfectly about the variance committee. I think with keeping the requirement for single-family homes and thus increasing the avenues to go through and provide a variance is really putting the variance board in a tough spot because it's a gray area. And it's because I feel the requirement isn't necessarily the best one. And so we're constantly providing ways to help improve a requirement that isn't maybe right.
Okay, Jean, did you have a motion you wanted to make?
Yes. Given all the questions and concerns from the folks here and from the council, and even granted that the committee did so much work, I move to repeal the current city sprinkler ordinance and replace it with the state fire code until further review.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there a discussion? Ann.
I still have lots of things to say. So I just want people to know that I checked in with a couple of friends of mine who are intending to build some infill in Montpelier and ran this by them to see if they thought it would work for them, and they thought it would, so that was encouraging. I am also really glad that cost provision is a part of the considerations for variances, so that is built into this. There was a question that was brought up, like, is this actually better than the current ordinance? And I would say it is definitively better because it is much clearer as to how one is going to, how one could go about getting a variance. And it's clear that one could get a variance, which was not clear from the current wording. Also, you know, as we sort of ran through the kinds of buildings that this would affect, one of the things that came up was a potential for cottage clusters. And that's the kind of single-family home that would potentially, that would be in the balance here, right? Like, are we going to require that they be sprinkled or not? And under this iteration of the proposed amendment, they would be. And if we just repeal it, they would not be. Frankly, I've come to a place where if someone's going to be planning a whole set of units for development, that's something that I would want to have sprinkled. I'm trying to think if there's any other iterations of things that are worth bringing up, but that was certainly one of them. Barbara, you brought up whether or not we should be writing this language in the first place, and I would argue that the same logic also applies to the zoning. Should we be coming up with language if nobody else does it? And we've actually had this reviewed by a lawyer, not necessarily in depth, but briefly, and he was comfortable with it. And that is comfort enough for me in terms of the legal standing of this.
Can I address that?
Sure.
Since you addressed that to me, your first point being that this may have been reviewed by a lawyer, but a lawyer is not a building professional. And building professionals that I have spoken with, and other people that have to administer, have serious questions about whether or not it could be administered easily.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
From that standpoint, and I'm sorry, what was your first point?
I had many points.
Yeah, many points. All right. But I think, the cottage cluster. But recognize that cottage clusters could be individual homeowners. So that individual homeowner with a small cottage of 1,400 square feet, which they're allowed in cottage cluster, then adding in the additional cost of the sprinkler, even when they're far enough away from their neighbor that probably isn't necessary. To me, that seems burdensome.
So just
okay. So I would like
yeah,
to
I know.
open this up, but let's not. If you need to make another comment, but then let's move on.
I guess I would just also raise that you also brought up the rental inspections, and that I would just say, as an advocate for rental inspections, that is something that we have put on the back burner, and that's a conversation that we've had with the housing task force, and it's a totally separate thing.
Ashley.
So I'm just curious. The proposal from the committee would send a large number of things to the variance committee. I mean, this could potentially be a huge number of things. I mean, does the city staff that committee?
We participate in it, yeah.
Yes. So that's going to take city resources. I mean, if we're talking, and again, I'm not showing my hand one way or the other on this, but I'm asking from a practical perspective, I mean, what sort of resources is that going to require the city to put forward to address the number of variances that are going to come in if there is, again, it's assuming an inundation of applications, but depending on the size of a potential project, that could happen. I mean, and so I suppose that's one question. And I guess my other question is, I forgot it, so I'll stop talking. So I just wanted to say one thing on that. I think that the variance committee is already receiving a lot of variance requests. They're just outside of what's allowed in the ordinance. And that makes me extremely uncomfortable, and is one of the reasons that I raised this, originally. So I don't dispute that there would be an increase, but I think there is already, there have been quite a number since 2013 at least.
Could you reread the motion? I'm interested in the word, Jean used a word and it wasn't suspend, and
Repeal.
One of the comments that other people have made is suspend and then work on. She said repeal.
To repeal the current city sprinkler ordinance and replace it with the state fire code until further review.
And I don't think we need to replace it with the state fire code, because that would
already exist
regardless. So I might, if you were willing to amend that, that would be more proper.
I just to read to repeal the current city sprinkler ordinance until further review.
Is that state your intent, Jean?
That is the intent.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as the state fire code.
Okay, so with that objection, we'll
Makes sense.
consider the amendment revised to reflect that. Other comments, Bill?
I'd just say if you're going to talk about, now obviously we still have to have a second reading, so, but if you think about repeal, just make sure that we're talking about everything, if there are, whether it's one or two sections of the ordinance, the single and one and two family pieces, if that's what you're really interested in, then we ought to talk about that. I mean, obviously, it's your policy decision, but make sure when the ordinance also talks about commercial buildings, restaurants with apartments up, so if you throw the whole thing out, make sure that's a thoughtful decision. Secondly, I would urge the council to, this was an ordinance that was enacted with a lot of input from professionals, building professionals, fire professionals, fire safety professionals. You've heard opinions from a lot of people. I know the Planning Commission offered their opinion. I'm not aware that they did full testimony with people that had differing points of view. I think I'd urge us to be deliberate and thoughtful about make sure you've had an opportunity to hear from a lot of different points of view with more facts before you make a rash decision.
This is a question for John Odom. John, what is the procedure by which one could move to table something given that there's a motion on the floor?
Once there's a motion on the floor, it takes precedence over it.
So we'd have to.
So we'd have
defeat
to.
it and then-
I think we'll have a vote. I mean, that's the way to deal with the resolution or a motion is to have a vote.
There can be a motion to amend the motion, and there can be, the motion can be withdrawn, but the motion is takes primacy.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just ask a question for Bob, because I think this is relevant to
And
this
I have one other
discussion.
comment to make also.
How does the state fire code deal with multifamily buildings and downtown?
Over 3
commercial
units. Anything, 3 units or more.
would be required to be sprinkled?
Except.
That buildings under 4-story, that buildings with a direct protected access, I think dedicated access to
Yes.
each unit
Yes.
are exempt. So if you have like a kind of a lower single, or a lower multifamily building and every unit has a
Okay.
door to the outside
Yep.
or a protected hallway to the outside, then you're not required
And
under
how
the
about
state code.
commercial buildings?
As far as?
Required to be sprinkled under the state building code.
The state controls commercial buildings.
New.
No, what my question is, what is the
I
impact
understand
of the
that
state
new
code?
have to be sprinkled, but
Yes.
the change of use, our ordinance also includes a change of use provision, so if something.
Where the state would not. Correct. A perfect example would be because I talk about it all the time, the Bohemian Bakery.
Yep.
Under the state, they would not have required that.
Okay.
The state. Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
I would encourage people, however you act, but between now and the next time you get together, to please take a look at the federal tax reform, because in the federal tax reform, and the Division of Fire Safety, Mike DeRocha assured me he would get something out within the next week. There was heavy lobbying done before that from the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the International Association of Firefighters, the NFPA, and in the federal tax reform, there is a provision for sprinklers in single-family homes, 100% write-off of those until the year 2022. And then at year 2023, it drops to 80%, and then it incrementally comes down. So if you want, I think I sent it to some folks. I can send it to the entire council. And Mike DeRocha from the Division of Fire Safety assured me today that the state would speak to that within the next week, because that is in the federal tax reform.
Can I just make a correction too? I actually was mistaken. You can move to postpone a motion within the discussion of the motion. And it's typically done either to another date certain, or, if someone wants to table something indefinitely, they can be motion to postpone indefinitely. So that's my mistake.
I would move then, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I would move then that we table this until our next meeting. I did not read this as we are going to vote definitively one way or the other tonight. I had thought that this would be an opportunity for council to discuss, hear from people, and then sort of make an informed decision
and I have heard a lot of feedback about this, and but I would like an opportunity to do some research of my own, and that's not to undercut anything that anyone has shared with us. I think at this point it makes sense to table it and take it up at our next meeting.
Second.
Discussion, Rosie.
I just want to say that this is the first reading of the ordinance. We don't have to do anything tonight other than conclude the first reading, if we want to conclude the first reading. And then we need to have a second reading, which was on the agenda for next time. I do think that we need to act with some deliberate speed here, simply because this does really impact how folks are going to conduct their building projects this summer, and whether or not they need to get permits, whether they need to design a system, et cetera. So I'm happy to not vote or decide anything tonight, but I would like to conclude the first reading so that, when folks go back and think about what they want to do, we can have more discussion next time and then come to a conclusion one way or the other. I want to make it really clear for folks who are building this summer what we want them to do at the next meeting.
It seems to me that these are not mutually exclusive things. If we vote in favor of postponing this particular motion, that's something that could be taken up later, and we could finish first reading tonight.
Okay, so we have a pending motion. It's been seconded. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so this matter will be postponed, and we don't need to take any action on the first
So
reading.
you're
or
concluding,
last
someone
reading.
wants to move to conclude first reading then?
Does that require a vote on the
Well,
first reading?
it might be just procedurally depending on a tabled motion, you might want to just, for the record, be clear that you're closing first reading, or you could declare it closed.
I'm not sure I know what Rosie, anyway, I guess the question is what the council wanted to do. Justin?
I just wanted to get clarity on the date specific. I know you said next meeting, and so I just wanted to have a date
14th.
associated with that. February 14th.
Okay, so our plan is to take it up at our next meeting on the 14th.
Second reading.
Second reading. Is there any objection to that plan?
Did you want a motion?
I don't think we need to.
I would move that we conclude the first reading.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Okay, so we will move on. Thanks, everybody, for your input on this. Next item, I think this is going to be very quick, is the farmers market. This is a request from the farmers market to go to the to move to the State Street.
Yep.
Oh, you guys are here. All right. Sorry you had to sit through. That's just the nature of the beast. And I do hope I'm right that this will be quick. I don't think we're going to have a lot of controversy over this one, I hope.
Absolutely.
We have to sprinkle all their booths, right?
No, we exempted tents. We did exempt tents.
Yurts.
I'm sure we can change that. Just thank you.
Should be taken up at the next regular meeting as a condition of that suspension.
That's going to be confusing. Okay, welcome.
All set?
Yeah, if you could just introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. So my name is Karen Wiseman. I'm the president of the board of the Capital City Farmers Market, and I've got here with me Ashton Curl.
Ashton Carroll, manager of the Farmers Market.
And one of our
Alan
longtime-
LePage, vice president and 42-year veteran of farmers markets.
Okay, well, we're happy to have you here.
We appreciate your time, and we really will be quick. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of our 68 member vendors that our businesses voted at our annual meeting to make this proposal to the city. Our proposal tonight is to move the Capital City Farmers Market onto State Street between Elm and Main Streets for the entirety of our 2018 outdoor season, which is May to October, 26 weekends. As we've even heard tonight, there's a lot of upcoming construction all over our city, and we're pretty sure that we'll be likely be adversely impacted in some way by having a lot of construction all around us. Secondly, we've always been on the lookout for a new permanent home that really can reflect city and the community and the farmers market. And so we're hoping that this will be the next step in that evolution of finding that right home for us. Our proposal right now is based on a set of successful trial markets that we did in September and October of 2017. We teamed up with Montpelier Alive, the Sustainable Montpelier Coalition, and the city, and we really think it was a great success. It had the look and the feel, and it looked great right in downtown. We have metrics associated with the look and the feel, though. We did a set of customer feedback surveys. We typically get over an average of about 2,000 customers every Saturday at the market. And during the first market, we were able to survey 335 customers. Interestingly, 60% of those customers were from Montpelier, 20% were from surrounding towns, and 20% were visiting our city. When we asked them if they thought that the location and the look and the feel was better, 70% fed back yes, absolutely. 15% were neutral and 15% said no, they didn't really like the change. Sales for us, we had the highest grossing market that we've had in 5 years of the market. Additionally, we saw 20 to 30% increase in gross sales as compared to our whole average of 2017 markets, as well as a history of the last 4 years of our market. So really, financially, it made a big impact. We have support from the Montpelier Downtown Business Association, Montpelier Alive, and the Sustainable Montpelier Coalition. As we all can imagine, there's not 100% support. There's not 100% support from the downtown businesses, our own members, or our customers. But what we've done is we've tried to take everybody's feedback and incorporate it into the details of our proposal. What we're actually proposing is a 1-year trial so that this gives us clarity for the year. We're in one place, but it gives all parties involved an opportunity to reassess and make sure it still really is the right kind of fit. We will be obviously making adjustments as we go along to address any issues that come up. We're asking the city to provide a porta potty for us during the duration of the markets. That was one clear feedback that we got from our customers, that there really were no facilities other than having to walk all the way to City Hall, and or unfortunately, we tended to overwhelm the downtown businesses' facilities, which we heard from as well. One idea that we have to put on the table is to work with Montpelier Alive and create like a quintessential Vermont outhouse experience and put the porta potty inside, attached to the info booth that Montpelier Alive has. And we could lock that and leave it during the week, because it is a financial investment to have to move those things in and out every week. We propose to maintain the lease that we currently have with this facility for the lot that we have. It's adjacent, and it keeps our contractual relationship there. We are requesting that no non-farmers market members be allowed to vend during the market hours. Our members pay a fee for Ashton's wonderful management services and advertising and things like that. And secondly, that we do feel with the proposed layout that it could affect customer flow, it could affect our layouts and things like that. And we're already squeezed pretty tight in this layout.
Can I ask for some clarification?
Absolutely,
there?
yes.
So when you ask for folks not to be able to vend, do you mean, for example, restaurants along the street having their outdoor seating? Or are you talking about folks particularly having, who might have a food cart or something?
Yeah, it would be not the downtown businesses. We actually look at this as an opportunity for them to participate and just create a much bigger destination. And so it would be specifically, there are certain vendors apparently that get a permit to vend on State Street.
Yeah, the street vendors that set up the temporary stands on the weekend or during the week, and the food carts.
Do we have a sense of how many folks would be affected by that?
Just a couple.
There were 2 or 3, depending on the weekend, setting up during our trial run. I don't know who has permits currently for vending on the street.
And are you talking...
Could those vendors still vend outside the boundaries of the farmers market, say on Main Street?
Yeah, we think that's fair. It's just kind of right.
Not in your market, but nearby.
That's how
would
we
be
work
fine.
right now. They're kind of adjacent to the market. But we did find that it made working with their space it sort of interfered with our layouts, honestly.
So you're talking exclusivity just within those boundaries from state to down?
That's correct.
Main to?
Main down, correct. So we're asking also for some help in finding a spot that we can put picnic tables and have a place where people can sit and eat, be a little bit leisurely, and a place to store our trailer and picnic tables. With the construction that's going to happen, we think that there's going to be an issue where we currently keep our stuff. We have ideas potentially at the courthouse and things like that that might want some city council help to forge those potentials. We're proposing a different layout than we use. We're proposing a circular layout so that the center of the road is going to be open and free. We think that's a better access for emergency vehicles. It's better access for our vendors, and we think it's going to provide better flow for our customers as well.
There's a view of that layout on the back of the handout.
Yeah.
If you wanna
There's way more
close out.
detail in the handout, but this is the important part. And we're going to be assigning spaces to ensure that we don't put like-for-like businesses together so that we can be respectful of the downtown businesses as well. The duration we're asking for is 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. For the street to be shut down. And, looking forward past this year, we hope that we can continue to get some help in trying to find a good, suitable permanent home. Maybe even down the road a little bit between Taylor and in front of the State House. But let's work on this first step, see how it goes, and we'll go for there. So that is our proposal. We really appreciate your time.
Rosie?
So normally when we have a street closure, we do the street closure permit application, and we hear from various affected city departments. Do we have some opinions from them on this?
I believe they've all met, but
I mean, if they've already signed off on it, then that's.
I think so. But
Do you want me to?
We did poll our department heads to find out if anybody had any objections to this. And generally, across the board, there was broad support for this. Tom, the Department of Public Works, has some concern, as they always do when we close State Street. They're not crazy about closing a throughway. That was the one objection we got. The police were fine, the fire department's fine.
You're here too.
And they're here too if you wanted to hear from them.
Sue, do you know why Tom objects to closing the thoroughfare specifically?
Well, he's always worried because we do get state funds and federal funds for our big roads, for our state roads.
It's more of a roads are for roads. And
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Donna, and then
very minor, just logistical question though, but in terms of the barricades and the cone packages, just want to clear what is the expectation, Public Works, Montpelier PD, staff, how is that one detail going to work?
That's a good question. I know during the trial runs, we were under the impression that we really weren't allowed to handle that stuff.
I'm just saying because it's just going to be a challenge since we're institutionalizing something every week, and I can't always guarantee, especially if there's 2 officers on, that's going to happen. So I just want to have that part. I'm not saying that's a deal breaker. I just want to make sure that we're all clear-eyed to some of those elements that the city, whenever we do close, the city has supported that function, both Public Works and the police department. Usually the police department. We don't call them Public Works generally on a one-time deal unless it's a big event or something. So just want to put that out there.
Can I just speak for a minute? As we did with the pilot project this past year, the farmers market has agreed to sit down with all the department heads that want to be there at the city, and we bring out a big map. We go over every detail and go over it and work out the details until everybody's comfortable.
Great.
And we're going to do that again.
Great. Rosie, do you have
Well, I guess I want to make sure that we know that that's happened before. I mean, I assume it sounds like it'll be fine, but I'm not clear what we're approving tonight if that hasn't happened.
Well, we could make it conditional upon that happening. Their approval conditioning and conditional upon that happening. And so if it doesn't, then
that we found.
Be willing to do it.
I thought you said they've seen this. No? I'm sorry, they haven't seen this packet?
They haven't seen the details, but we bounced the idea off of them. And the reason that they're here before you tonight and not waiting a little bit is that they also have to start their planning, and they have some board meetings coming up. And they didn't want to go through a lot of hoops if, in fact, the council was disinclined to allow them to do this.
So I have a question about whether you've considered, and I'm sure you have, using the Heaney lot and State Street. It seems like there's enough demand to support both spaces.
That's a good question. We try to stay in the smallest area possible. If we move to State Street, then we take up the parking that's on State Street. And so to have adjacent parking is definitely one of the important things that we've heard as feedback from our customers, as well as the downtown businesses. If we take the State Street parking, then it can. And the Haney parking, and there's really not a lot of parking for the direct downtown
I've never,
business.
honestly, though, never had trouble finding parking. I mean, people might have to walk, 100 yards. Anyway, I just ask you to think about it. I think there's demand, and I think it would make even a more vibrant atmosphere downtown. I think people would really like it, and I just question whether, I think parking
We're
is
always
strong
happy with more
feedback from the
space.
businesses. Not wanting the parking taken.
Well, they lose it in the parking lot now, but they have the
It's
on-street.
important to the businesses I hear in my district, for sure.
Overall, I would just like to express strong support for getting more people out in the streets downtown. You've got some data to back up the sales figures and the results on that. I also would encourage merchants to keep an open mind that this is a win-win, not a competitive situation, and that the more customers we can get downtown and enjoying themselves in our streets, likely they're also going to see those sales figures reflected in their gross sales as well. I do have a couple points just to go through. Don't need to respond to them, just thoughts. Wanted to put out as you're kind of sounds like on the path to developing a solution that's going to work for everybody. Making sure that you're planning to work with merchants, and it sounds like you are, with restrooms and not putting a competing product directly in front of their business, I think would go a long way. I did get some feedback during the trial run from some elderly folks in town about accessibility for disabilities. So while it is active in public streetscape, any reasonable accommodation that can be made to make those stands as accessible as they were previously, I'm sure would be greatly appreciated. We clarified the vendors on State Street. Do you have a sense of how many parking spaces would be given over to vending between 6 and 2?
I don't have a direct number available, but there is a net gain with the parking that we would gain in the Haney lot, the current market lot, just because of the way the parking's oriented.
Sure, part of the concern is probably going to be proximity to the businesses that are right there on State Street. So as you're managing that parking asset, maybe some dedicated parking for those businesses, or encouraging your vendors not to consume the stuff that's closer to those businesses, or a variety of ways that you might really make accommodation for those businesses so they don't feel sore about losing those spaces directly in front of their businesses.
But we can't allow cars in there at all. There can't be dedicated parking. When the street's closed, that's
In the
whole
Heaney
point.
lot?
Oh, no. The Heaney lot is going to be just open, and I think that's...
Okay.
They're not
That's-
going to control the Heaney lot.
Correct.
You
It's
have
just
the
gonna be
lease
public
for
parking.
that lot during that time?
The
Right.
lease is going to be transferred to State Street.
Right.
I would just I would ask you to think this is a longer-term consideration, but not to let parking drive all of this discussion. This sort of reminds me of the Yogi Berra comment about the popular restaurant. People don't go there anymore because it's too crowded. And I think that's that's a situation we'd face if you expanded the farmers market. You can think of, I know a couple of cities that close their entire downtowns. I think in Des Moines, Iowa, their entire downtown closes. It's an enormously successful farmers market, and there's not any parking in downtown, but it's packed with people, thousands and thousands of people every weekend. I mean, that's the whole idea of it. So I think the notion that people aren't going to come because there's not going to be parking would be, I think the result would be just the opposite. I think we'd have more people downtown because it would be more going on.
I agree that there'll be more people there. I was trying to make the point that there may be some merchants who have concerns about that shift in parking usage, and so the more you can be proactive and accommodate those concerns, it probably would help in the relationships and the ongoing support from downtown merchants. But lastly, I did have one logistical point, and I don't know if, obviously, it was around the traffic signal at State and Main, and if there's some limited capacity for police support, I'm sure DPW will be looking at whatever signage or traffic control things we can do to help keep people from backing up and trying to turn, and now the police have to get involved, so just that we're thinking proactively about what we can do there.
Done.
Well, I appreciate you thinking about the parking, because I did hear a lot from merchants. And likewise, I heard they really don't like this format. They like the one that you used in your trial, which is the vendors, the farmer market vendors being inside, so that the back of your farmer's market isn't in front of the store. Because this way, people were circulating between the stores, the sidewalks, and then they had a walk space, and then your vendors. And it was like a pod in the middle. Is there a reason you went and put yourself back against the sidewalks?
And so there were a couple different reasons that we were looking at that. One was just better emergency vehicle access, having a wider lane down the center, which also meant for a quicker setup and breakdown, because we could have two vehicles go down the center and have vendors set up on either side instead of having only a single lane of traffic, which was an issue. And then one of the major complaints that we got from customers was access for people with disabilities. They seemed that trying to have the vendors in the center and have people kind of walk between the curb and the remaining area of the street next to the vendor was an issue for a lot of customers.
Okay, I think you'll find a different response from the merchants downtown. That's all.
Yeah, we did bring this layout to the Merchants Association this past meeting because we didn't want them to not realize that we were
I
changing.
know how many don't go there, so I think you'll hear.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's
just
been
stay a little more flexible.
Bob, did you?
Yeah,
have a
we would
comment on that?
encourage this setup.
Yeah.
With the straight emergency vehicle down. The first week, and I think it was the second week, there was a couple jogs. So you had to, because of the build-outs in the sidewalk, it caused, so emergency vehicles would have had to come down and make a couple sharp turns, and it would have been very difficult. This is what we would encourage and would ask for, is this setup.
Thank you, Bob. All right. Anybody else? Do you have a motion?
So unless there's people from the public who want to comment on this. So I got an email from Sindra Cottison, who was Koki Pet, and she is not able to be here, so she wanted me to read a statement from her. So she says, first I want to apologize for not delivering this short message in person. I've recently been under the weather. As a downtown merchant who owns the town's pet shop on States, my shop stands 100% behind the farmers market, sharing our street with us on Saturdays this coming summer and beyond. The other downtown business owners I know strongly support the move as well. I'm speaking on their behalf. The proposed move brings the market far greater visibility, which should translate into far greater vitality on Saturdays in Montpelier, the downtown's most important commerce day. More people downtown is good for the farmers market, good for those of us with businesses on Main as well as State, and good for those of us living in Montpelier, as my three dogs, my husband, and I do. I'm sorry I can't be there as planned to present alongside the farmers market people who will soon be my new neighbors as well as friends. So that's from Sindra.
Can I just add one more thing? Along with meeting with the city and other departments, I've been going to the Downtown Business Association meetings to discuss some of the potential issues that businesses do have. And while I agree that not every business goes to those, I'm going to be meeting with Sarah, the head of the Downtown Business Association, next week ahead of our selection process for the upcoming year, just so I can talk some specifics with her and find out if there are any specific businesses that want to meet in person and just talk about any issues from the trial run and what we're looking at doing for this year.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion? Anyone?
What's the wording here? The motion approving the move of the farmers market to State Street for the 2018 season.
Contingent upon.
Conditioned on the meeting with the.
Contingent upon a meeting with all of the heads of departments, affected heads of departments.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion?
I guess that, does that, I mean, think I know the answer, but this means that we are granting the permits to close down State Street for every Saturday, just to make sure that that gets on the record that is what is happening.
Yep, that's what that's authorized.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you all very much. Look
Thank you
forward to
very
another
much.
great
Thank you.
season of the farmers market. Okay, our last substantive item tonight is the dog ordinance.
Someone had to be last, right?
Yeah, I'm whimpering.
Thank you for your patience.
Whimpering like a dog here. All right, so I don't know who's presenting. Is this from the? I don't know who's.
Turn it over to Sue. Sue's been kind of shepherding this. And
Sue, could you?
Bob was the chair of the committee.
So Dennis, before we take, well, I don't know who's presenting this proposal.
I wanted to make a request first.
Okay.
This is just, I'm very pleased to have this document, but it's like a totally new ordinance, if not just amendments, and it changed everything. And there are a lot of people, I only got this on Sunday, so there have been a lot of people who have talked to me about it and said they'd like a chance to participate in this. Because it all is so new, and there wasn't the ability to see what from the previous thing. Although it was the previous amendments, the first reading, September 27th. They couldn't see what was added, what was deleted, and this is really completely new. So I would like to propose that we make this like a first reading tonight of this new ordinance, and have a second reading or have a third reading.
I was hoping you were going to ask to delay the whole thing at 10
Yeah,
of
we
10.
can go
But
home. All right, delay the whole thing.
Delay it.
I suggest that.
Well, I'd certainly not going to get any argument from me. I'm going to fall over. But
I guess I actually am apt to agree with that. I know that there are a lot of people in our community who care a lot about this, and they're dog owners, they're non-dog owners, and it's late, which I'm fine going, but I also want this to be a super inclusive process, because I know that there's been a lot of work that has gone into this, and I don't want to exclude anyone from participating in this. So I'm wondering if we made a commitment to put this as our first substantive agenda item at our next meeting.
Have the sprinklers?
I think that those should be 1 and 2, and I'm going to ask selfishly that they be 1 and 2 because I'm having major surgery earlier in that week, so I'm hoping to make it, but I probably won't be able to stay for the entire meeting. But I think that these are two issues that our community is clearly invested in, and I would really like to.
Okay, well, are you all okay with that? You sat through this whole meeting, but if you're okay with it, I'd certainly support that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is there any objection on the council to putting this off for the next meeting? Okay. Well, thank you, Dennis, and thank you all for your patience, and we'll look forward.
And we'll make an effort to
look forward to a full
circulate that
discussion.
widely and post it.
And I
Yeah, look
just
forward.
want to make clear that the commitment is to put those two agenda items as the first substantive.
Sure.
And it'll be the first reading, though?
Yes.
It'll be the first reading of this version?
Yeah.
Well, it's still technically the second reading. It's amended from the first.
But this is entirely different from the first document.
Whatever, I don't think it matters.
So will it be a first reading?
It's
I think technically we've done that. I mean, I'm certainly have it this assurance that we give this all, plenty of opportunity for you to, if you don't feel like you've had the opportunity to discuss it or to consider it, we can continue that. How's that?
I might suggest you could plan on second reading with a plan to continue second reading to a third meeting.
If necessary, we could do the continuation of the second reading.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you all. Okay, so I believe that concludes our regular business tonight. Next item would be council reports. Donna?
I wanted to go back to an email I sent out, and I think I sent it to the whole council, on the short-term bicycle parking policy. It's about bike racks that the Montpelier Transportation Infrastructure Committee has on their budget that you've approved. We have money for bike racks, and sometimes we will have private owners reach out to us, and we may work with them to get a bike rack. Sometimes we have a place that people ask for us to put it on city property, but we did this policy. We've been doing it, but we didn't have it written down. So we wrote down the policy. We made the application. Anne, who made an application, already has us doing some modifications so that makes sure it can be a person can ask for it, doesn't have to be just a business. So if you have any feedback for this, or if you feel when we get it finally draft that you have to approve it, we'd like to know now. Otherwise, we're going to do some editing, get it up, use it, and keep modifying it until it works right. So what's your pleasure?
So this is city funds?
This is the
the
bicycle rack that we
alternative
have
transportation.
money in the MTAC.
I don't think it would be a bad idea for the city to approve it. Okay. I really appreciate you've done it, and I think that's great, and I didn't have any problem with it.
Didn't know how much micromanaging you wanted to do.
I emailed Corey and told him I'm fine with it.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you all set?
Is that the majority want us back more than Rosie? Do you all want to see it?
I do not.
Okay. Jean?
You can just email it to me, and I'll look at it.
I emailed it to you a couple of weeks
I did.
ago.
I thought you were saying, and I looked at it. I thought you were saying you'd make more changes.
We'd make changes as we get feedback and use it.
Oh, okay.
This is
All
going
right.
to be...
No, I did look at it, and I thought it was great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Gene.
Pass.
I want to acknowledge the police department in light of an incredibly complicated and difficult situation, everything that they've done this week, and also the city manager for a really relevant, timely, and thoughtful social media post that he made in regards to this incident. I also want to acknowledge there have been some refreshments made to our city webpage, and greatly appreciate it. It looks like some new photos, and hopefully we're using whatever analytics we're getting back in terms of usage to continue to refine and develop that important tool.
So echoing Justin regarding the incident this week, and I especially wanted to encourage all city staff to take advantage of the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. Even if you weren't directly involved, if you were sitting in your office, if you were driving a truck, and not there, it doesn't mean that you weren't impacted. And I speak from personal experience that these things can hit you emotionally in weird ways if you don't deal with them. And so I just really want to say there's no shame. You don't need to feel like you had to be directly involved in order to take advantage of that service. That's a benefit for you, like your health insurance, like your sick leave, your vacation days, and we expect you to use it when you need it. And so please take advantage of that.
Likewise, I just want to thank the police department for their response to the incident last week, and just all the support from the community. I know that all the teachers at the high school are very grateful, and the students as well. So yeah, thank you. And on a slightly lighter note, I know I sort of recused myself from the portion of the discussion about the school bond, but I just want to express that I'm very excited about the infrastructure bond for the school, because it involves fixing the roof, which is currently not functioning in my classroom, and it has been leaking for the last week. It's very exciting. I have lots of pictures.
I would just like to thank everyone who came out tonight to talk about pretty important issues that our city is dealing with. It's really renewed my faith in our community, and I feel really grateful to serve with folks who are so thoughtful and mindful, and to be part of a community who's really invested in everything that the city council is taking up.
Ashley, it does feel like our community's gone through a lot recently. In particular, of course, the incident at the high school was traumatic, but it also brought out, I think, a lot of positives in our community. Not support for the police officers, support for the high school and the students, but also the family and even the young man who was involved in his family. So I think it really spoke well of our community and rallying behind everybody who's affected and understanding just what a tragedy it was. So I appreciate and echo what other people have said about the police department, and also, of course, just a heart goes out to the family that, and of course, a lot of us knew them, been part of our community for decades. So
I just need to note that starting tomorrow, I can be accepting candidate petitions in the office. The deadline to get those in is the end of the day, February 4th. February 4th is a Sunday. I don't feel like I have authority under charter to do what we do with state deadlines and make it for the next Monday. So I encourage folks to get that in by Friday, February 2nd, or to use the Dropbox if it comes in over the weekend, and I will check that. Also, just make a note to just folks in general and any candidates that I am doing the online voter guide again. It's at montpeliervoterguide.org, or you can navigate to it through the city website, and it just is going to create a forum to discuss any of the ballot articles on there, and for candidates on the ballot to give a little introduction to themselves.
I don't have a lot. I also want to express support to the police and the EMTs who had to respond, and to the school. They were a great ally, and the community too. People with very supportive comments. On a less exciting note, just remind you all that you should have been emailed a document relating to my multi-rater assessments. I hope you all fill it out. It doesn't take very long to do it, and get that in. That'll be helpful. And then, in theory, we're discussing our own review of that. I don't know if we want to try to coordinate that. I will not right now, but we're supposed to be doing that on the 14th too. So, so we need to get those forms out. And, just mention that. That's all I
Okay,
have.
is that it? All right, that's my agenda, but I think that's it. With that objection, at 10 o'clock, we'll be adjourned.